Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today's guest is Dave Asprey. Dave is the founder and chairman of Bulletproof 360, a high-performance coffee and food company, and the creator of the wildly popular Bulletproof coffee. He is a 3-time New York Times best-selling author, host of the Webby award-winning podcast Bulletproof Radio, and has been featured on The Today Show, Fox News, Nightline, CNN, and dozens more. Over the last 2 decades, Dave, the father of biohacking, has worked with world-renowned doctors, researchers, scientists, and global mavericks to uncover the latest, most innovative methods, techniques, and products for enhancing mental and physical performance.
Hello, everybody. Today, we get into coffee, karma, reincarnation, and consciousness. And who better to do that with for my 100th podcast episode than the legendary Dave Asprey, author of 6 books, founder of many companies, a devout researcher and formulator, and the man behind Bulletproof Radio and the Bulletproof supplement line. Dave and I recently shared our wisdom together on his podcast, where we did a 2-part episode, number 725 and 726, on issues such as exclusion dieting, 4-day rotation dieting, biohacking, and my concerns over that concept, and got into a number of concepts best encapsulated as spirituality. We had a fantastic, deep, honest conversation together, which only warmed us up for this deep, exciting exploration. In this deep, insightful, informative episode, I asked Dave what led him from software engineering to developing multiple businesses, writing multiple books, and creating the Bulletproof product line and his amazing Bulletproof Radio program. We finally had a chance to compare notes on how we independently came up with the concept of adding oils, fats, and butter to coffee, and were surprised to find that we were doing this research at the same time without realizing we were both sniffing down the same trail. We had a lovely dialogue on what happiness is, how the brain is heavily biased toward the negative experiences in people's lives, and ways we can restructure our paradigm to create more freedom in our lives. In the mix, we dialogued on karma, reincarnation, his experiences with shamanic exploration, and healing with plant medicines. But that's not all. We talked about Houston Smith's research regarding whether or not we can actually have spiritual experiences with plant medicines, or if they can only occur in temples, churches, and structured religious practices. This is a very fun, exciting, intriguing interview, and there's something juicy for just about everyone. I hope you enjoy this, my 100th interview, as much as I did.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Living 4D. Today, I'm super excited to have Dave Asprey on my podcast. Welcome, Dave.
Paul, I am happy to be here.
Awesome. You know, Dave, I think most people out there, probably anywhere where people carry phones, know who you are. So I certainly don't need to give a long, comprehensive explanation about Dave Asprey, but you are probably quite well known for your Bulletproof Radio show, which I was excited to be on. And we had a very interesting and deep conversation. So thank you for that. It was really fun. And you've written, 5 or 6 books now?
I've written, I think, 6 now. Just sent my next one to the publisher for their final edits last week.
Right on. What's the title?
It's called Fast This Way. And it's a new take on fasting. It's my first big diet book, The Bulletproof Diet. People have lost about 1 million pounds on that diet. It talked about intermittent fasting, helped introduce it into our way of thinking about biohacking and the human body. But there's a lot missing in the current world of kind of digital fasting and kind of thump your chest. There's some nuances that come more from ancient wisdom that you might be familiar with. And I thought it really made sense to bring that into the world of fasting and the world of biohacking. So that's what the book does.
That's beautiful. And then, of course, you have quite a comprehensive line of supplements and products, and you've been involved in a lot of things. So I'm excited to sort of dive into that. So to start with, even though there may be people that are somewhat familiar with you, I know there's potentially going to be some that aren't. Could you give our listeners an overview of your developmental upbringing and what ultimately led you to being famous as the originator of the biohacking movement that's so alive today?
Sure. I guess you could call me famous, at least in some corners of the internet.
I think you're pretty famous.
I'm doing my best to help a lot of people, and sometimes fame comes along with it, but that sure isn't the goal.
That's the best way to get it.
I think so. So I'm a former computer hacker. I was young, excited by the internet, and most people didn't know what it was. The web browser hadn't been created yet. And my weight hit 300 pounds. I was a 46-inch waist. I'm 6'4", so I had about 100 pounds of fat and inflammation I was carrying around with me. And I made this t-shirt that said, "Caffeine, my drug of choice." And I sold it over the early internet. And it turns out that was the first thing ever sold over the internet. The first e-commerce before e-commerce had a name was done out of my dorm room because I was trying to make money so I could pay for my tuition.
I didn't know that. That's a neat story.
That seems more fame-worthy actually than Bulletproof Coffee, but people are fickle. So
I just want to interject something. You know what's really funny about that? You know what my first t-shirt was that I made and sold?
What?
It said, "Exercise, the drug of choice."
No way.
Yes.
So caffeine, your drug of choice, exercise, the two stack together really well. That blows me away. How funny.
Yeah, that was my first t-shirt, "Exercise, the drug of choice."
This is a very small world. So I did that, and I started my career in Silicon Valley, and soon I'm working as a co-founder of a part of the company that held Google's first server when it was 2 guys in a computer, and when the Facebook came calling, and people like that, Hotmail, at the beginning of the internet, all the big names we know today that are billion-dollar companies, they would come to us and we'd hold their computers, and I was a founder of the consulting group there. So I'm in my mid-20s, and all of a sudden I've made $6 million, which is fantastic.
That's amazing.
Yeah, 2 years later, I lost it all.
That's part of the process of growth. I've lost a lot too.
It actually taught me a couple of things, because you asked about developmental milestones. So when I did that t-shirt thing, I went onto a little chat room. It was called Usenet before the browser existed, and kind of like Reddit would be today. And I said to this Rutgers professor, he said, "No one's ever going to make money on the internet." So I trolled him, and I'm like, "Well, you might be from a big Ivy League school, but I'm already making money on the internet. So, you need to wake up." Just some kind of snotty, arrogant, I'm 22 or something. And the Miami Herald calls and says, "Hey, can we interview you?" So I do it. And pretty soon I'm in 80 publications in my double extra large t-shirt and my swollen face with glasses and, puffy red cheeks. And I'm like, you know what? Fame feels good for about 5 minutes, and it's of zero value. And it didn't, it was like, "Oh, look at me." And then nothing changed. I'm like, this isn't actually that big of a deal. So I had my brush with fame, and it truly doesn't make you happy. I learned how the media works, where one person calls you and then like everyone else calls you, and there's this game that they play. And then, a few years later, okay, I tried Rich, and I will tell you, it's awesome to have a lot of money, right? And you're like, "Hey, look at me, I'm so cool. I can, do whatever." But end of the day, I was miserable when I had $6 million. I was a really angry, anxious, kind of a jerk, actually. The muscle that actually I exercised the most in my body was the extensors on my middle finger, probably when I drove. So I was kind of doing that. So, okay, I made the money, lost the money. It's clearly nicer to have more money, but the data that I've given talks about now, it shows there is a cutoff point where a net additional dollar doesn't improve your happiness level, but having your basic needs met does improve your happiness level. So I lived all that in my 30s. And meanwhile, let's see, I had arthritis in my knees when I was 14. By the time I was 30, on blood tests, I was at high risk of stroke and heart attack. I was pre-diabetic, and I was having severe cognitive dysfunction that was scary. It was to the point that I actually thought about it and said, maybe I should buy disability insurance, because all the lab tests, all the doctors, everything I know says I'm fine, but I don't really trust myself to pay attention and remember stuff. Something's not right. And it was this deep sense of, I have the pedal all the way to the floor and I'm trying to accelerate and the car's slowing down. I can push harder, but I got nothing left to push. And my career is going like crazy and all that stuff. But that led me to say, all right, I'm just, one day I went to the doctor. I said, "I feel like I've been poisoned. Something's not right. I managed to lose 50 of these 100 pounds. I've tried all these diets. I worked out an hour and a half a day, 6 days a week, half weights, half cardio. I can max out all but 2 machines at the gym. And I'm still a 46-inch waist. I'm still fat." And the sense of failure, like when my friends are exercising, not at all. I'm exercising more than any of them. I eat lettuce and they're eating French fries. And this sense of maybe I'm eating too much lettuce. And one day I just kind of snapped. I went to the doctor, said something's not right. And I said, "But vitamin C makes me feel better." And he goes, you should stop. It could kill you.
Oh my God.
And I,
Sounds like today.
it kind of is, right? And I looked at the guy and I go, what about Linus Pauling? Now, okay, I'm in my mid-20s, but I'm already involved with running an anti-aging nonprofit group that's still around today. We're bringing in world-class experts to talk about what they called orthomolecular medicine, what today would be called functional medicine. And I knew damn well what I was talking about. And when I asked him that, the doctor looks at me and goes, who's Linus Pauling? And I looked at him and I said, Nobel Prize twice, 90 grams of vitamin C a day, you're fired. And I walked out of his office. I never paid him. And it went on my credit report for 7 years. I never paid him. It was a moral issue for me. I was a bit of an angry person in part.
Well, I understand, in principle.
It was in principle. And also I was living in a house that had stachybotrys at the time, which makes you unable to control your emotions. It turns you into a jerk, a tired jerk usually.
What's a stachybotrys?
Stachybotrys? It's toxic black mold. It's one of the
yes.
ones.
Okay. Yes.
And I've actually started. I've started a company to deal with toxic mold. I shot a documentary, and I've raised the awareness of mold as it's only in 100 million homes, and it's affecting people's consciousness as well as their biology. So it's one of the many missions I'm working on. But at the time, I didn't know any of this was going on. All I knew was this guy is seriously making me mad because he doesn't know what I paid him to know, and he's telling me to do things that would work against my interest. And he doesn't even know he's telling me that. So this is kind of what got me on my journey where I was old before I was 30. I had all the common things you get when you're in your 60s, arthritis, and I have stretch marks when I was fat and all this stuff. And I looked around one day, I said, wait a minute. I'm teaching classes at the University of California here in Silicon Valley to working engineers about how to build the modern internet. Like I know my shit. And why is it that I feel like crap all the time? And one day I said, you know what? I can manage the internet and I don't know who owns the router in the middle. I don't know who owns the server. I don't know what all connections we're going through, but somehow we can troubleshoot our connection today. And it's because to make a system change, you don't have to know everything about it. But in academia and in medicine, they're stuck on this. Well, there must be a reason. And if there isn't a reason, it can't be done. And the reality of the world is that all new discoveries are when someone does something that isn't supposed to be possible, but is, and then we figure out the reason. So I sat down one day and I said, you know what? I am so done with this. I fired this doctor. I'm just going to study every night for 4 hours. And since Google didn't exist when I started this path, I used Alta Vista, one of their early search engines. And I would just go to town. And at the end of every night, because I'd made some money, I would actually just order whatever I thought would work. And whether it was, a 20-year-old brain stimulator thing that I still use today because it's one of the best ones out there, or supplements and all. And I learned and I studied. And 4 years later, I knew as much as anyone I ever met about it. And I was able to hack my biology without knowing everything that was wrong, but being able to say, here's a likely hypothesis. I tested it and came up with a new mechanism for it where, you might say, well, Dave, how do you know which of the vitamins you're taking works? Actually, I don't really care that much because what I did is I said, I want my brain to work again. What are the top 25 things that are most likely to make my brain work? I'll do them all because I'm desperate, because I feel like crap, right? And then your brain works and you say, this is amazing. Maybe I'll stop doing a few of them and see if my brain keeps working. And that method, it is great for hacking and it's terrible for double-blind clinical trials because the assumption behind the modern medical system is that one thing is going to do it. The reality of our biology is it's a complex system and you don't change just one thing. You herd a group of sheep. You don't just say, I did that one thing to magically make the sheep line up. You're constantly massaging and managing the herd with sheepdogs or ATVs or however the heck sheep herders do that. And it's the same thing. When a whale tries to get a school of fish all together with bubbles, it's not one bubble that did it. It's the complex system of when you did what, and you do more than one thing at a time. Magically, you do that. And you get where I am today. I'm about 210 pounds, 10.2% body fat on my last scan. And I'm never hungry. I don't restrict my calories. I don't work out crazy amounts. But when I work out, I definitely push my muscles to the limit when they're hypoxic, actually. And I'm younger now in my late 40s than I was in my late 20s. And that's been my path. That includes some time in Asia studying with a master's and discovering Bulletproof Coffee and starting a $100 million company and all that kind of stuff. But that's a different part of it.
That's an interesting thing because, I haven't heard the story of how you came to the concept of fats or butter or oils and coffee. I know how I did it. We got so busy in our last time together with your interviews that we never got around to that. How did you come across that?
Here's what happened. I have long been a coffee fan. The only time I ever got an A in calculus in engineering school was the semester I discovered espresso.
Yeah, I love espresso.
Triple espresso before the 8 a.m. class. And magically, I was an A student for 1 quarter. And
until your adrenals fried.
Yeah, and also just 8 a.m. classes and me are not friends. So at least they weren't back then. And so I really look at how, coffee's my thing, but I found out that I drink coffee and I would, an hour or two later, I would just feel like garbage. I get this anxiety in my chest. I'd get angry. I'd really want sugar. And I realized coffee was making me weak. So I gave it up for several years. And they were kind of dark, fuzzy years I barely can remember because they were so bad. But I went to, and I also became a raw vegan. I went down that path, which is a very dangerous path. And I decided, all right, I'm going to learn meditation from the masters. I started saying I've kind of tapped out on what I can get out of the West, but I am going to go look at what our hundreds of generations of people have discovered, because they have to have been wanting the same things I do, which is to live forever and feel great all the time. So I went to Tibet. I went to Nepal, actually, and spent some time in a monastery there. And then I went to Tibet. And I decided on a whim to go to Mount Kailash, which is the holiest mountain in the world. It's like Mount Olympus if you're a Hindu or Buddhist or of the bone following. And what became very clear to me was that I felt like crap because it's 18,000 feet. It's 10 degrees below zero. I'm there after tourist season like a dumbass. And I felt kind of like death, which is how you feel at very high altitude with only something heated over yak dung. I mean, it's pretty rough. Well, this little Tibetan lady, I still have her picture, she gives me a little tiny mug of yak butter tea. And the way they make this, they put yak butter and tea in a wooden butter churn, and they just churn it up and down and up and down and up and down. And then they pour it and you drink it. And I just remember thinking, that seems so dumb because couldn't you just eat the butter and drink the tea, for God's sake? Right? But they always do it that way with no running water, and all their possessions have to be able to be pulled by a yak. I mean, this is very, very remote. So I drank it, and within 5 minutes, it was like someone turned the lights on. I wasn't hungry. The dull headache of altitude wasn't there. I wasn't unhungry. I could eat. I didn't have nausea. And I kind of felt like dancing. I thought, this is crazy. Let me have another one. And then for the rest of that 3-day Kora around Mount Kailash, I just hit the yak butter tea whenever I could. And I wrote in my travel journal, this is amazing. So I come back to the States afterwards and I bought some tea and I bought some butter and I blended them up, and it tasted like crap and it didn't make me feel anything good. So I said, it's the tea. So you blow $1,000 at the Chinese tea store in Mountain View, and what you get is a lot of very expensive, bad tasting tea with butter in it. So, all right, it's the butter. So I went to the high-end gourmet grocery store, bought 25 kinds of butter and tested them all out. And it turns out that yak butter tea is not something you can buy, but grass-fed butter is something you can buy. And grass-fed butter works, but it doesn't work if you use grain and corn-fed butter. And it's because of the lipids that are in there. And now I know I can say that with truthfulness and science backing that. At the time, it was a hypothesis. And then it came to tea versus coffee. Well, I had been studying this toxic mold thing I talked about. I became very knowledgeable on it. And I realized when I came back from that trip, I went to a coffee shop, and it was a high-end one. I said, I'm going to have a cup of coffee and just see how I do, because I had convinced myself I was allergic to coffee. And I drank this cup of coffee, and the feeling of amazingness came over me. I'm like, good. I finally had a cup of coffee, and it was just life affirming. And I didn't have any reaction. I felt so happy. So I go to the place the next day and I would try a different coffee and I drink it and I feel exactly like I always did. And I'm like, I know what this is. It's something different in the coffee. It's not me. It's that not all coffee is the same. Not all cannabis is the same. Not all alcohol is the same. No wonder. So I dove deep in the research and I came up with the beans for Bulletproof, which are lab tested. And I changed the process of making green coffee so that there is not a chance for toxins from toxic mold to form. It turns out the most common mold in coffee, called ochratoxin A, is not regulated in the US or Canada. That means,
I was going to say it's very coffee and grains are very high in mycotoxins as a general rule.
You're exactly right. So I'm like, okay, I can hack that. And I did. And we did careful mycotoxin testing. And it turns out that coffee will hide ochratoxin A in normal toxin testing because there's a masking agent that naturally grows in coffee. And eventually we figured out how to do it and how to produce coffee that doesn't cause the crash and the jitter. And in my first book, I actually did a IRB controlled trial of our coffee versus regular coffee. Just people would buy it, their local famous coffee chain. And magically, with or without butter, they perform better on coffee without mold toxins. And what I learned, and I have the president of the Specialty Coffee Association at the time on camera telling me this. He says, Dave, I was in Japan when 10,000 container loads of coffee arrived, and the country of Japan rejected the coffee because it was too moldy. And I said, what'd you do with it? And he said, we sent it to the United States. Yes, absolutely. It's not illegal there. And by the way, I might be wrong. It might be 1,000 containers, not 10,000, whichever. It's a giant amount of coffee. I'm just trying to remember what the amount is. And so this is happening. And people, when I started talking with people, usually competitors, they would just come all after me and just yell at me because you can't make this up. Like every country out there, China has levels of OTA in coffee that are regulated, and we don't in the US, and we think it doesn't matter. So anyhow, I never understood how that could even be controversial, clean coffee, but it was. And now it's, I think, generally accepted. A few people still say it doesn't matter, but they're angry because they're drinking moldy coffee. So you just have to feel compassion for them.
Hello, everybody. If you're interested in making a real difference in the world by healing yourself and others, you might want to hear more about our Chek Academy program. What is the Chek Academy? Well, it's the result of over 30 years of hard work and research designed to help you become a holistic health and performance professional through my distinctive integrative approach. The Academy covers everything you need to know, including diet, functional anatomy, exercise, stress reduction, coaching, personal success, and spiritual attunement, and it's the most effective way to learn the comprehensive and corrective techniques I've cultivated throughout my career. That's because the Academy goes beyond offering my courses and advanced training programs. It offers you group mentoring, online workshops offered nowhere else on coaching and business skills, like the best way to set up your rates, peer support and accountability, and so much more. And it really works. There are Chek-trained professionals all around the world with varying backgrounds, from bartenders to surgeons to truck drivers. The Chek Academy is designed to transform anybody, regardless of their background, into a successful holistic health practitioner. In fact, over 40% of our students have no prior health and fitness training. The only things you need are an open mind and a desire to learn. It's affordable, too. Instead of paying tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars on expensive conventional education on nutrition, kinesiology, the science of effective coaching, and related sciences, you can attend the Chek Academy for as low as $372 a month, and that includes everything you need. If you use what you learn in the Academy, you can easily make that much money in a single day, and it's not unusual for our top Chek professionals to make as much as $350 an hour. Being good at what you do and loving it is the best means of ensuring an excellent income regardless of the state of the economy. If mastering holistic health, enhancing athletes' performance, and being a healing influence in the world interests you, visit chekinstitute.com/academy. That's CHEK institute.com/academy, all lowercase, and get your application in. You can also set up a free consultation with one of our career advisors to learn more. Applications are open until the end of October or until we reach full capacity, so enrollments will happen on a limited first-come, first-served basis. I hope to see you in the Academy this year. Lots of love.
A couple of things. One thing people don't realize is there's a lot of carbohydrate in coffee. It's got a lot of sugar in it. And the way people always say to me, I don't put any sugar. I said, no, the sugar's in the coffee. And I say, here's all you got to do. Next time you finish your espresso or your coffee, just leave the cup sitting till it dries out and then smell it. And it'll smell just like syrup. And so that's one point. And the other point is that very few espresso shops clean their machines properly. So when you have a bunch of ground coffee and coffee residues sitting all over your machines where the group head goes in and etc., it just turns it into a fungal infested situation. And I too learned a lot from a very, very bad fungal infection as a kid. It started when I was a teenager and no doctor knew what the hell to do with it. I used to itch my groin so bad when I was working on my race car. I'd take my clothes off at night to have a shower, and I'd have blood all over my leg because I was scratching it with a screwdriver because I'd get these terrible groin itches. And none of the doctors that I saw had a clue what it was. It was useless. But so as I'm sure you're the same, once you've had a real bad fungal infection and you know what it's like for your brain and your body and your joints to be affected by it, then you become like a very sensitive miner bird that can smell trouble. And so I bought years ago, I studied extensively on coffee, and I bought Illy's book on coffee, which is one of the most comprehensive books out there. I don't know if you've seen that or not.
Yeah, Illy is a master. In fact, in Europe, their coffee bean sorting process is the highest and most technical one on a bean by bean sorting basis. They don't do the lab testing that I do, but it's a pretty good coffee company.
Yeah, so studying Illy's book, which really was very thorough, and probably 10 or 15 other books, one of the things that I became aware of is there's definite procedures for keeping coffee machines clean so they're safe for people, but I probably can count the number of coffee shops on one hand that I've ever seen follow those procedures. And so I learned right away, if I go into a coffee shop and the machines aren't being cared for, you're about to get a big dose of fungal mycotoxins. I was curious, what year was that you were having this yak butter and tea?
I had yak butter and tea in 2004.
That's funny because I was doing my research. I'll tell you how this came about for me. I kept having so many patients, particularly females, that when I would do all my intake testing on them, had dysglycemia, low blood sugar, and high glycemia at the same time. So they were vacillating back and forth between high and low blood sugar. They had a lot of, myriad of cases of adrenal fatigue. And I was using functional medicine testing to measure this with a 24-hour cortisol rhythm test. And what I saw was there was this very consistent pattern amongst athletes, and particularly I saw this a lot in working mothers. And the worst group is single working mothers. In other words, they've been divorced and they got kids and they're trying to be the man and the woman at the same time. And every time I looked at their diet logs, they were basically living off of rabbit food, or there'd be like a bagel for breakfast and nothing else, or some cornflakes or something. But the most common thing that I saw was people were starting their day with just nothing but straight coffee, often adding sugar to it. And so I realized from trying to coach people off of coffee, it was extremely hard to get them off of coffee. And it was also clear to me from all my analysis that a lot of these people were having severe blood sugar handling problems. And so I began to realize I've got to come up with a solution for this that's practical. And it just so happened, by the way, this is around 2002. And it just so happened that at the same time I was studying chelation. And
I was studying it back then too.
Yeah. So I was like, I'm sitting there in my library at my table where I do a lot of my studies. And I'm like, it all of a sudden hit me like a lightning bolt. All I've got to do is chelate coffee. And the best way to do that is to add fat to it, or protein, but protein's not going to be very nice in coffee. So I started experimenting with all sorts of butter. And I knew a lot of people wouldn't want butter because of their ideas about fat. At that time, we were having this huge fat phobia in the United States. So I started testing nut butters of all types.
Wow. And this was what year?
2002.
Okay, so we were in the same mindset there, because I came back. I tried all the nut butters. I tried coconut milk. I just want to get the high I got in Tibet.
Yeah. So
wow. Okay.
I was researching all this. And what I did was I thought, I wonder if anybody else has thought of this. So I hired a professional librarian to do a worldwide literature search. And the only thing that she could find was mention of yak butter and tea from the Tibetans. And that was it. There was nothing published in the world on it. So I thought, wow, I've come across something very interesting. And so what I found is using ghee and nut oils is that they float on top of the coffee. They don't micelize into the coffee, but the butter has enough protein that it will actually dissolve into the coffee like cream would. So if people didn't have problems with dairy, I told them to go to a full thickness organic source cream, but I had nothing but positive feedback from people that tried it. And I noticed that their blood sugar handling was improving. And of course, I'm also trying to teach them how to eat properly and things like that. So, but people don't change their behaviors really quick. But the first person that I taught that to that was really famous, who really popularized it, was Laird Hamilton. He was my client. Gabby was my client in 94. And she brought Laird to me because she was so happy with the results. And I've been consulting to them ever since. And, whenever they need help, they call me. And so Laird started talking about it, and I think wrote about it in one of his first books. And that sort of, put my idea on the market. So when people started saying that you were doing it, I was like, well, I've never heard, I searched the world for literature and I have no idea how this came about. So I'm really curious about this. And here it is all these years later, and I'm now getting the chance to ask you that.
It was definitely Tibet. And I hadn't come across your work. I think the first time I came across your name was at A4M, maybe when I met my wife in 2011 there. Or no, I didn't meet her in 2011. I met her right when I got back in 2005. Actually, I met her in 2004 at A4M, the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. So it would have been around then. I heard your name, but I hadn't seen the butter thing at all. And what I ended up doing was I said, all right, I can pull the toxins out, but because of the anti-aging nonprofit stuff that I'd done at the Silicon Valley Health Institute, I knew about MCT oil. And I said, all right, I'm going to try adding this. And then it was like rocket fuel. And that was what the recipe for Bulletproof Coffee was. You add some MCT oil, grass-fed butter, not regular butter, and then coffee without the mold, and you blend it up, and it's good. And it's funny you mentioned Laird, because Laird also called and was like, Dave, adding this MCT oil, man, this thing is crazy. I want to do a deal with you. And I'm like, Laird, I can't write you a check as big as you want for this. Like, we're a small little company here. So he ended up going out and starting, Laird's thing, and he puts palm oil and coconut sugar and a bunch of other stuff in it. But we definitely talked about it. And he's like, this is totally changing my surfing game. And I got a lot of pro surfers who use Bulletproof now. And it's funny because I thought that must be the Tibetan thing. And, and then I hacked it. And then somebody mentioned, like, I don't know, 5 years ago, like, Paul also puts butter. I'm like, there's another human who does this. I love it. And then a taxi driver in New York filled me in. And I mentioned this thing to him, and he said, I'm from Africa, and I'm from Nigeria. And I mentioned butter and coffee. He goes, oh, my people have done that forever. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, yeah, we have one of our tribes, and they make something called kill coffee. And he said, this is where we believe it's from. And kill coffee, they would grind the coffee beans so that the competitive tribes wouldn't know what herb they were using. They would mix them with ghee, and they would eat it before going into combat. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, I believe it. Totally.
To this day, they're known as like the tribe, who's the most financially, with it in the country. And they put butter in their coffee to celebrate special events, like we'd have nutmeg and eggnog or something. But in some tribes, and this guy, still remember, it was so cool. He actually went home. He said, I smuggled some butter home from my grandmother. And he brought me a little tiny pat of butter so I could try butter from the place where coffee was born. I'm like, okay, that's so cool. So apparently there is a practice in Africa that I didn't know about either. But yeah, it's a crazy thing. And I love it that it sounds like if you were doing this in 2002?
2002 is when I started researching it and saying, I've got all these patients, and the common denominator is they're all drinking a lot of coffee on an empty stomach. And probably I'd say 70% of them were single women, pushing themselves like legal assistants and dental hygienists. And, and so they would come to me with all sorts of problems, as you can imagine, when you push yourself that hard, not getting enough sleep, eating rabbit food, and tons of stress in your life, and, chasing dollars and challenging relationships with ex-husbands, and also a lot of female athletes that were training like men and screwing their hormonal systems up by overstimulating themselves and starving themselves.
So common.
Yeah. And so the other thing about coffee that people don't know is it's one of the most heavily sprayed crops in the world with pesticides. And Penny and I traveled the world for probably 25 years. We were going around the globe twice a year, every year, because we have a branch of our business in Australia. We do a lot of work in England and Scandinavia, and I've lectured all over the place, from Rome to Russia to you name it. But so we were living out of suitcases most of my, probably the first 25 developmental years of my professional career. And so I would notice that, very few places, you're dead lucky if you could find anyone serving organic coffee back then. But I would notice that all of a sudden I would drink a coffee that might taste good, but I would get like this weird electrical buzz. And, almost like I'd been poisoned or I was getting sick, but
yes,
it was
exactly.
temporary. And I tracked that back to the pesticides, because I started researching what pesticides they were using on coffee most commonly. And I started looking into the symptoms of it. And I said, sure enough, that's what it is. So another technique I developed that I'll share with you and the audience is I actually started carrying some Pascalite clay, which is a highly adsorbent and absorbent clay. It's strongly negatively charged, if I remember right, so it electronically attracts the molecules of the pesticides to it. And I found that if you just take 1 teaspoon of either millionite bentonite clay or Pascalite clay, drop it into the coffee, stir it up, and wait about 60 seconds, and the clay will, because it's so heavy, will sink to the bottom of the cup, and you won't even taste it. And using the clay, I could knock the pesticide negative effects right out.
It's funny because zeolite and bentonite, actually only bentonite, but bentonite and zeolite both work to remove mycotoxins as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the U.S. military will use bentonite and activated charcoal as the 2 most common mold treatments, but it really depends on which mycotoxin you're dealing with. But you can reduce all toxins by doing that. And if you let the clay settle to the bottom, it's a really good idea. Or you can take capsules. So what I'll do I'm pretty good about traveling with my beans because I don't like feeling crappy. But I will, if I had to drink another kind of coffee, or worse, if I'm doing like a coffee tasting where I'll take a sip and I know it's moldy, but I'm going to drink a little bit more because it just won the cup of excellence or whatever, then I will take charcoal and bentonite at the same time. That's the coffee. And I get far less of the sore joints and just feeling like crap the way it does.
Yeah, I'd been doing a lot of research on clay because have had to do countless amounts of detoxification on people. And I went through all sorts of stuff myself. I could give you a long list of similar sort of stuff like you. Some of mine was orthopedic issues from real bad racing accidents and motocross racing and, street racing and every other thing, man. I've got a body full of broken bones, but, the clay, I just said, well, shit, if this will absorb the toxins out of the coffee, I could really be helping a lot of people, because this is long before the concept of organic coffee was around. And, I tell people, just don't drink the last bit of coffee. You don't want to drink any of that clay. Just leave it sitting in there. And it blew people's minds. It really helped a lot of people who were having a lot of cognitive problems after drinking coffee. Completely free themselves of that. And so that was just another one of my little investigations that turned out to be quite fruitful.
It's the real deal. I'm so happy that you've done that work. And I will just tell you, coffee is a life-changing substance. And in my perspective, it's got some prebiotics in there. And the overwhelming data is that it's pretty good for you. But if you do coffee without the kryptonite, either that we spray in it or that grows in it during the fermentation process, I think it's even better for you. And if you counteract those toxins the way we're talking about, it's cool. But here's something that you might not have found in your research. In fact, you couldn't have at the time. It always bothered me that these Tibetans, who are generally wise people, why are they carrying around a butter churn? Okay, they have to milk the axe and make butter. I got that. But why would you pour your tea and your butter in the churn and churn it instead of eating it? And what I was so curious about this, I actually donated $50,000 to the University of Washington and said, do some water chemist research here. There's a professor there named Jerry Pollack. We become friends.
Yeah, he's the 4th phase of water guy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he actually measured what happens when you put ghee, and I sent him some of our ghee, the bulletproof ghee. What happens when you put that in water? And magically, he said, Dave, this is the largest exclusion zone I've seen. And actually, he sent me the whatever high amplification microscope that he uses. And he said, look at this. When you have a droplet of fat in water, it makes a very large exclusion zone. So what the Tibetans were doing is brilliant. Okay, these are people who are half my size. For breakfast, they have 2 tablespoons of sampa, which is barley flour, and a little bit of yak butter tea, and then they kick my ass all day long. They can carry more than me. They're wearing cotton stuff in 10 degrees below zero. They're falling into lakes. One of the guys did that. I thought he was going to die of hypothermia, and he's laughing at me, and I try to give him a jacket he puts in his backpack because he's not cold. I'm just like, they're superhuman, right? Well, in the morning, when the forelady of the family is sitting there spending 10 minutes churning the butter, she's making it into 100% exclusion zone water. That's why the yak butter has to be blended. That's why you put grass-fed butter in your coffee and you blend it. Because if you don't blend it, you don't get the exclusion zone. And then you're relying on your biliary system to do it. So that was, to me, like, that's why I can't eat a stick of butter and drink a cup of coffee. It just doesn't work.
Well, the other thing they're doing when they're spinning it is they're structuring the water because they're creating a vortex.
Well, the churn is actually an up and down pumping motion, not a spinning.
On our farm, we had a hand churn that was a centrifugal.
Oh yeah, those are much nicer. I think that they really had a handmade wooden one from God knows when, but it was literally just kind of going up and down as far as I know.
That's interesting because you can use rotary motion, centrifugal motion to structure water.
Absolutely.
You are listening to Dave Asprey and I get into all sorts of cool but important concepts regarding body-mind health, creating sustainable happiness, and cultivating higher consciousness. If there's one thing for sure that Dave Asprey and I agree on, it's the importance of high-quality nutritious food for all aspects of our body-mind well-being. When it comes to easy access, potent nutrition that is minimally processed, I get all excited about Organifi's excellent products. Organifi offers you a comprehensive line of certified organic superfoods, from excellent drink mixes, to protein powder, to probiotics, to excellent collagen supplementation for your skin and connective tissues, to liver, joint, and immune support nutrition. My family and I and my clients and students use Organifi products every day, and I've never heard anything but great feedback. They're easy to prepare, highly nutritious, taste great, and travel well to work, meetings, the park, sporting events, or school. And you get 20% off as a Living 4D podcast listener when you go to Organifi.com, that's Organifi.com, and use the code capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K 20. That's Chek 20, all caps. So if you use that code on checkout, you can get 20% off on any of their amazing products. I truly do love them. My family loves them, and I'm quite confident you will too.
Earlier, when you were talking, I wrote a note. I'll refer back to it. I'm curious, what is happiness to you?
Happiness is a state of mind. It doesn't have a lot to do with what's going on around you. So it has to do with the way you look at the world. I've done a lot of work on neuroscience. One of my companies is around using high-end neurofeedback to help you see what your brain is doing so that you can have more control of your brain. It's what you would do without neurofeedback. It's just the idea of let the computer show you the state so you can create the state yourself. And having done that, it becomes really clear that the causes of unhappiness are almost always untrue either belief systems or untrue, or we'll say inaccurate patterns to the world around you. And this kind of be a long answer to your
Well, I love it. It's an important question, and I have a lot of concepts because I've looked into this extensively myself, and it's part of my spiritual practice to do it right. So I love hearing your explanations.
Well, I'll dive into a little bit. I love getting a chance to talk with you. I really enjoyed the interview on my show too. In fact, a lot of the audience feedback was really positive as well, because we can both talk about this in a curious way without sort of beating anyone over the head with it. So in my belief system that came together from ayahuasca in Peru a long time ago before it was cool, and all this meditation and science and whatever else, it culminated when I wrote my book on how the brain works and how mitochondria in the brain work, the ancient bacteria that make power and are actually environmental sensors. I believe that we are controlled by our mitochondria first. There's more of them than there are cells in the body. And they're not just power plants. They sense the environment and then they make power, or they make hormones, or they make other things, including inflammation. So even if you want to get all quantum about stuff and say, who is the observer? I'll hate to tell you, you're not the observer. Because you that you recognize it sees things long after the mitochondria already saw them, sensed them, decided to do something, and then passed it on up the chain, and you noticed it a quarter second later.
Well, that we could dive into that, but I don't want to distract you because I have different viewpoints on that for a lot of reasons. But
okay, I'm happy to go there.
I love hearing your expression of it, so that's what I want to hear.
So
first.
if these little guys are out there, and because I'm an internet guy and I taught classes on N+1 horizontal distributed architecture, and one of my concentrations in my undergraduate degree was in a form of artificial intelligence. So I've gone deep on emergent systems, emergent behaviors, complex systems. And what's really going on, I think, is the algorithm of life. And if you're an artificial intelligence researcher listening to this, do not program AI systems to do what I'm about to say, because this is what would kill humans.
Yeah, that's one of my questions I was going to get into with you later. So we can return back to it. But I want to hear whatever you're sharing. So let it rip. I'm digging it.
So if we're running the algorithm of life, okay, you have to weight your decision making. So the first thing that all life forms do is, if there's something scary, you have to run away from, kill, or hide from it right now. Highest priority. Yeah, freeze is one of those. Hiding, it's a form of hiding. So if you do this, we're going to call it the first F word, is fear. So scary things, you must react to them right now with the strongest possible emphasis of all of your biological energy. Drop everything, stop having babies, stop doing anything, because a tiger's going to eat you, and then your chance to propagate the species goes away. So there's our first F. Now, the second F is eat everything, because famines have killed way too many people. So we have fear and we have food. The third F is, well, okay, you're a life form. You're a bacteria, a zebra, or a cactus. It doesn't really matter, okay?
Fornicate.
There you go. Fornicate it is. You got to reproduce, right? And so those three things are what everyone who's ever done anything they're ashamed of, it's from one of those three buckets.
And that's basically what the reptilian brain is driven by.
Well, it's not just the reptilian brain. That's even a complex network behavior that's driven even further down from a single-celled pattern that's repeated infinitesimal number of times, or actually an infinite number of times. And it's because complex behaviors and complex patterns emerge from very, very simple rules repeated stupidly large numbers of times. Stephen Wolfram wrote a book called A New Kind of Math that explained this and showed, here, I can make this flower by taking 5 rules and doing them over and over and over in a program called Mathematica. So you get really deep on this, and you go, wait a minute, okay, so some of our behaviors are emergent behaviors from ancient bacteria who are our puppet masters, who think they're petri dishes that they're walking around all day going, ha, ha, ha. Well, I would say the fourth F word, which is friend, which is form a community and support others, that is the lowest priority. That's the normal priority. So if you have things that are level 10, which is fear, level 5, which is starvation and food, level 3, which is make sure you reproduce, those take all of your attention and all that. And it's very hard to be happy if you're stuck in fear, if you're stuck in hunger, and if you're stuck in, I'm just going to call it lack of partnership. In other words, if you're of mating age, at least
lack of community or connection.
Yeah. And then the final one is community and connection. So true happiness comes from understanding that those first 3 F words are going to happen, and that they are manageable, and that none of them is actually a fear word unless it really is fear. So what happens is, I have no mate, therefore I am going to die. It's not real, but the body believes it. I have no food, therefore I'm going to die. It's not real, but the body believes it. And there's something scary. It matched something that was scary when I was 2 years old, so I'm going to give you a fear response anyway. So becoming happy is largely a matter of dealing with that pattern matching that is wrong. So your fear isn't triggered very often. And if it is triggered, having coping mechanisms to say, oh, it's going to pass. I'm still safe. It's all right. And what's left when you do that is community, service to others. And generally, if you do some of that, happiness emerges. And it's just it's the state that happens when you're not being triggered by these first 3 F words.
Yeah. I've got a few things to share if you're hip with that. You had a good...
I'm always learning, of course.
Yeah, I'm just sharing. You may not find this new, but I just feel it's useful to the conversation. One, when we look at, I've got a series of German physiology texts, and I like German physiology texts because they're very clear in their explanations. And this book shows the amount of data that flows through the human nervous system. And this book was probably written in 1990, so the stats have changed a little bit on that last time I checked. But basically, it says there's about 9 to 10 billion bits of information flowing through a typical human being's nervous system per second at any given moment, but that the conscious mind only selects 10 to 100 bits, all of which is based on perceived survival threats.
Yes.
So, that just totally fortifies what you're saying is what I'm trying to share.
You reduce the number of perceived survival threats and your happiness goes through the roof because you have all this abundant energy. Even 15% of the thoughts that go through your head, if you're a normal person, are about food. Like, what if that 15% was about enlightenment? Like, wouldn't it be a nicer life?
I listened to an interview with Deepak Chopra where he cited research that looked at people's thinking, and they found that the average person thinks 68,000 thoughts a day, of which 90% were found to be negatively oriented or fear-based. So, that really puts things into perspective right there. So what are the techniques I teach my patients and clients and students to help them distinguish a real threat versus, a perceived threat that is based on your programming, is just ask these questions. So say you just got fired from your job, or they laid you off, or your wife said she wants a divorce, or some kind of event like that, which would usually wind a person up quite a lot. I say, ask yourself these questions. Can you breathe right now?
Exactly.
Yes. Do you have access to food and water? Yes. Do you have access to shelter and warmth? Yes. Are there people that love you in your life? Certainly. So if you can breathe, you have access to food, water, safety, shelter, and warmth, and there's people that love you in your life, then the threat's not a serious threat. And therefore, when you bring that into your conscious awareness and act as though it's just another event in your life, it's an undulation, which is essential for consciousness itself, then you can realize, okay, it's a catalyst for growth, it's an opportunity. And if you look at both sides of the equation, as Napoleon Hill says, there's a silver lining in every cloud of gray, but you've got to look for it. Arnold Mindell says, people are afraid of chaos, but they don't realize that it's full of information, and all you got to do is be present with it and allow yourself time to work with it until you see what patterns emerge, and then you'll find there's information in the chaos. But the ego has such a fear reaction to anything that it doesn't perceive that it can control. So people actually, as you know, live their whole lives basically running away from fear and trying to control anything they perceive is going to be a threat. And they end up spending all their time chasing and running from imaginary dragons, none of which are real, until you can't breathe, you can't eat, you don't have safety, shelter, warmth, food, water, or love in your life. Those things represent what I would consider to be significant threats if you don't have those in your life. But if you have those, then everything else is really a growth opportunity.
I've been talking with my kids, they're 11 and 13. And I'm like, the first time you break up with someone or they break up with you, it's probably going to feel like you're dying.
Yeah. Rejection.
It's not real, but it's going to feel that way. And here's why your body does that. It's because if, you're not loved, if no one loves you, well, then no one's going to feed you, and then no one's going to protect you from the tigers, and then you're going to die. And but that's not true. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Your body believes things that aren't true. And the tricky part, the thing that no one taught me when I was young, is that it believes those before you have a chance to see anything. And it has the ability to tweak what you hear, tweak what you see, and tweak the story you tell yourself. And so the part of becoming happy is figuring out whether your story is true. And the more true your story can be, the happier you are. And the more you believe your story, the more your ego's in charge and the less happy you'll be, because your ego doesn't want you to be happy. It wants to make sure that you don't wreck the petri dish that it thinks it owns. Like, that's just what it comes down to.
You know, there's a phenomenal book that was published probably in the last year that if you haven't read, you're going to probably get an erection reading or listening to this. If you're like me. One time my wife got very embarrassed because I was giving a lecture. Somebody asked me something like, what makes you happy? And I said, well, a good research article that's from a well-designed, scientifically designed study will give me an erection. I said, I prefer a good research paper over sex sometimes. And my wife was in the room and she turned red and everybody was commenting to her for the whole rest of the conference after that. And of course I was just being metaphorical and silly, but people took it seriously. But this book, How Emotions Are Made by Lisa Feldman Barrett. Are you familiar?
No. It's
awesome. It's loaded with right up to date scientific research. It completely destroys our current model of what emotions are and all the systems they use to train the FBI and all that shit. It completely, utterly destroys it. And it's really well done. But she states in there, and she gives scientific reference to the fact that it's now well documented scientifically that you see what you believe and you believe what you see. And it's very hard to break out of that loop.
We see this at 40 Years of Zen, the neuroscience company I started, and I've brought a very substantial number of CEOs and Hollywood people and athletes and people like that through the training. And in the training, it's almost like a lie detector during parts of it. So you're going into these advanced meditation states and you're going through a process of sort of testing your story. And the problem is that even if you realize your story is false, the part of you that's generating the story still believes it. So it'll keep re-injecting it. And what we found is that when we're having people go through and talk about what they learned, if they do it with just one other person, like a facilitator, it oftentimes doesn't go away. But if there's two other people in the room, they'll remember it. And the reason is that the ego that we're talking about there, it has the power to erase your memory. So you will literally forget your successes and you'll think a lot more about your failures. Or someone will tell you something that's not true. Someone will tell you something that is factually true. But in your reality, it is so impossible for that to be true that it can't be true. Therefore, the person is wrong. And it's actually very logical. So if you look at what some of the, I'm not going to name names here, but some leaders and actually some employees I've had, they'll go, look, I never fail. Right. And if you believe that you don't fail or you never drop a ball, you never make a mistake, well, what that means is that when you make a mistake, you won't see it. Others will see it and they'll tell you and you won't hear it. Right. And you'll walk around fully convinced it's everyone else's fault. It wasn't me. I didn't do it because I don't fail. Right.
And that's what the shadow's all about.
It is what it's all about. But the fact, at least in my work, in my belief system, the shadow emerges from a core desire of the ego to maintain control of your hardware so that it can make sure you jump away from a tiger in case it comes. It'll do anything. It'll spin you in this garbage world. And the mechanisms for that, I would say, come from a book called On Intelligence by Jeff Hawkins, I think. This guy was the founder of of Palm Pilot, the very first handheld little device that would have been the great-great-grandfather of an iPhone. And what he did is he started this company with handwriting recognition, all this cool stuff, but he really loved cognitive science. So he wrote his opus called On Intelligence, where he talks about exactly using math and using very believable scientific things, how information in the body is managed going into the brain. And it exactly matches the most elegant systems that I've ever designed for the internet. And that was what made it really stand out. And what happens is, let's say you wanted to monitor 10,000 devices all over the world. Well, you'd have a little processor running on each device that says, monitor normal stuff. And if everything is normal, don't do anything. But if something abnormal happens, send it up a level. And you could send it all into one place.
That's exactly what random event generators are doing.
That's a whole different thing with the Heart Math Institute and all. We should talk about that. So,
well, I'm just making the point that they're monitoring exactly lots of devices all over the world looking for something that's abnormal, which is a deviation from a 50-50 split of positive and negative, or ones and zeros, if you want.
And in fact, Jeff's perspective that I share is that consciousness itself, the things you notice, are only things that either you choose to notice or things that deviate from your prediction of 1 microsecond from the future. So what's going on there is inside each cell, there's 100 or 1,000 or a few thousand little mitochondria floating around, predicting and acting and noticing and basically changing their behavior. And then they say, oh, this is noteworthy, and they share it upstream, whether it's via electricity, EMF, or chemicals, the 3 big ways, or light, the big 4 ways actually that the body communicates within itself. And then that little local cell system does something, and then it rolls up and eventually gets to a neuron. Then it comes up to your brain, and your brain has all these filters that are before you can think of it. There's 7 layers in the prefrontal cortex, and all of them are to strip out information you don't need to know. So eventually, you're captain of the Starship Enterprise, and you see the little report on your screen, but it's been filtered and filtered and filtered and filtered. The problem is that our filters are just garbage. And that is where this lack of happiness comes from. And when you're conscious, fully conscious, we'll call it enlightened, it's because your filters actually all match reality, right?
Yes.
That's where I'm looking to go. That's why I'm so interested in validating my story. And it's why tech is a part of my meditation practice, because it helps me know when I'm lying to myself.
That's one element of enlightenment. But the other element of enlightenment is realizing that you are actually one with all that is, not a separate entity.
Oh, and now you're going to piss off all my tech friends, Paul. So here's the deal. I have all these people like, Dave, can't you wait? We're going to upload ourselves to the internet. And having done the work that I've done in other realms, while simultaneously being a pretty darn credible entrepreneur and all that sort of stuff, you're already uploaded to the internet. You just haven't figured it out yet. So
yeah, exactly.
I laugh about that.
Hi, everybody. I'm sure you've all heard of the benefits of bone broth, but I bet you don't know about bone broth protein powder. I found an awesome bone broth protein powder with Paleo Valley, and I asked Autumn Smith if she'd explain why hers is so good from Paleo Valley.
Well, like you said, collagen is basically the fountain of youth, and most of us are not getting enough of it in our diet because maybe we don't have time to simmer bones on a regular basis. And so we created our powder to make getting the benefits of collagen for your joint health, for your gut health, for your mental health, really, really simple. And we sourced it from 100% grass-fed and grass-finished bones. So it is a beef bone broth protein powder that you can literally put in everything. It's tasteless. I add it to my son's smoothies. I put it into his desserts. You can even put it in soup and get all the benefits of collagen without all of the time and energy and investment. So all you have to do to check it out is go to our website at paleovalley.com. That's PALEOVALLEY.com. And you can use the code CHEK15. That's lowercase CHEK 15 at checkout. And I hope your family loves it.
I know you'll love it. Keep your body healthy. Keep your kids healthy. And let's make the world a better place with Paleo Valley. Enjoy. Yeah, I have a book in my library. I think it's called God is the Internet. And it's not really necessarily referring to God as the actual internet, but it's just gives a very beautiful, well-diagrammed explanation that when you look at the connections throughout the universe and how energy and information move, that basically his argument is God is the ultimate internet. And what we've created as an internet is really just a copy of what we aren't conscious of, but is really the foundation from which all creation emerges.
Mm-hmm. I totally believe that. And it's that awareness, man, there's all this stuff going on. And I've seen this in Silicon Valley as a venture capitalist, as an investor, and certainly as a board member, and as in my own companies. The biggest danger that we run into when we're trying to make change in the world is if you believe your own reports, oh, look, everything's great, but they're inaccurate, you will drive into a bridge. Like, you will absolutely fail. And the problem is that most people, including you and me some of the time, we believe our own reporting of the world around us. And, that guy's absolutely a threat. And like, actually, what you're feeling, Dave, you're feeling envy. You just don't see envy because envy is the hardest of all the things to spot in yourself. And if you had the ninja move, you'd actually be saying, you know what, I'm going to choose to put myself in that person's shoes and feel gratitude for what they're experiencing instead of feeling envy for myself. And then I'll turn off that pattern. But if you don't know that, you're just going to be like, that guy's a jerk. I don't know why I don't like him. And it's those awareness practices and ability to turn off the emotions that are actually not useful. It frees energy. That's important.
I have a technique that I use to address that very issue. I tell my students and anyone that I'm coaching for that in this very context, and I do this myself, I just ask myself the question, is it really true?
Yeah. Isn't that Hayes? What's her name? Hayes.
Well, that's part of Byron Katie's
Yeah, sorry, Byron
work.
Katie. Yeah. She was on a while back. Yeah. I get her and Hayes mixed.
Is it true? And if you say yes, then she says, is it absolutely true? Well, there's nothing that you can know that's absolutely true. So the point is it always leaves the door open so that you are aware that your perception may not be reality and that you can be more patient and expand your sense of receptivity to the individual. And, if you study Jung's work on the shadow and on the psyche and many, many things, Jung's very deep, but Jung says you can always tell where you have, shall we say, a belief structure that's not healed, or a complex is what he would call it, because if someone triggers you, then they've identified where you have a defense mechanism that may or may not be authentic or working for you.
There you go. If someone pushes your buttons, you gotta look at it. And that also, though, Paul, leads to this permissiveness and codependence and lack of boundaries, which happens. Certainly, I've been codependent in my younger years when I hadn't figured this out. But it's okay to say, you know what? I don't like that person. I don't want them in my life because they're toxic. And you can do that, but you don't have to feel aversion, hate, and disgust when you do it. You just have a clean boundary. That's an important nuance, especially, for people who are younger and just figuring this stuff out, man. I wish someone had spelled that out for me.
Yeah, what I teach people and what I practice myself is the concept, you don't have to like somebody, but it is important to love them. But you can love them at a safe distance. So, if somebody is too hard for you to be around because, whatever your perception is, or they trigger you, or you just don't like their mannerisms or whatever it might be, it's normal. It's impossible to like everybody. But as you grow spiritually, you come to realize that what you're looking at is the divine manifest right in front of you. And that expression of the divine is as authentic, real, and unique as your own. And to exclude somebody from your reality through judgment is to create an illusion. And the universe, in my experience, does not support illusions that are not congruent with reality. Therefore, we must provide the energy to maintain those illusions on our own. And a lot of people are exhausted because they're maintaining so many of those illusions all the time. So I teach people, you just have to decide what safe distance is to engage somebody. Maybe you don't want to be there personally, but you can talk to them on the phone. Maybe that's too invasive. You can email them. Maybe email allows too much elaboration and argument, then stick to text messages. If that's too much and that's too scary or too dangerous and it keeps turning nasty, then use prayer. Center yourself, concentrate on being one with that person or their soul, and share your own wishes, thoughts, feelings, desires, needs from your heart, but continue to stay connected to them from the heart space. And it's amazing when I work with people that are going through all sorts of life challenges and relationship challenges, and they start actually staying connected from the heart space. The most common thing I get is they come back and they go, Paul, it's a miracle. I've been connecting to my mother or my dad or, whoever's driving them freaking nuts through the heart, like you told me. It's too dangerous to talk to them or email them, so I just do what you said. And I went and saw them for the first time in a month, and they acted completely different, and we got along. And I say, there you go. Now you're dealing with a higher level of consciousness, and you're dealing with a greater reality. The illusion is the separation. The truth is the connection.
It works exactly the way you're saying. And it's one of the things that we do with clients at 40 Years of Zen is you sit down and sometimes it's just hard to do. There's incredibly vilified people, people who've done horrible things in history. People are pissed off at power structures. They're pissed off at individual people in leadership positions, whether it's in their family, in their company, in their country. And all of that carrying weight, it's just that 10x weighted fear F word. And, if you're carrying that baggage, you're carrying that baggage. And that means all the electrons that your body makes from air and food go into that, which is nothing good. And you got to turn that off. And the way you do that is exactly like you said. It's forgiveness. It's, you can have a heart connection and you can feel compassion for someone trapped in the world of their own making that has nothing to do with reality.
Yes. Well, the reality of a deeper reality is that we embody our thought process. In other words, we become a physical manifestation or embodiment of our dominant thoughts. So people that are angry all the time have physiology that is basically angry, for lack of a better term. In other words, if you were to assess them with biofeedback devices or blood measurements, etc., you would see a person that's under a lot of stress because anger is not a healthy place to be, no matter what. So really what people don't realize is that they are the embodiment of their mind, and when you learn that changing your mind is really, really an important step to changing your body. And if you don't change the mind, but you try to change the body, you're usually just going to get palliative results that chain you to some kind of drug or pill.
Yep. Totally true.
You were mentioning bacteria, and I wrote a note. I wanted to share something with you that I think you might find mind-blowing. You may have already come across this, but I have a feeling maybe not. Do you know who the quantum physicist John Archibald Wheeler is?
Heard the name, don't know him personally.
He's very, very famous. He's probably pretty old right now. I don't even know if he's still alive, but he was all the way back with Einstein and a lot of these guys, and he might still be alive. If he is, he's probably in his late 70s. But anyhow, he was curious at what the hell was all the space dust that makes it hard to see stars and galaxies. You know how empty space can be full of this dust. And so he actually researched it, and he actually figured out what it was. Guess what? He found space dust through the entire, far as they can see with the most advanced telescopes was.
What did he find?
Bacteria. He said 98% of everything you see clouding what looks like empty space that they call space dust is actually bacteria.
Now, that's at odds with what the people who are, space nerds. I mean, my daughter has a piece of the moon given That's to cool. us by a friend. It's a meteorite from the moon, not one from the moon landing. But I mean, we can look at these with very powerful magnifying glasses. I know way deep 2 miles down on the earth, we've got bacteria teeming, but I have not seen this. Like, how do you know that that's actually real?
I would have to go back and look at the research, or that's a question you'd have to ask John Archibald Wheeler. But, if you take a stone and look at what it is, it's going to be full of bacteria. It's earth. And bacteria, you can find bacteria in lava flows. You can find it in the hottest water on the planet. The bacteria is like the most durable creatures that we know of.
It is absolutely true that there are bacteria everywhere. And one of the things that actually brings me great peace, people are saying, oh, we're destroying the world. It's the end of the earth and all that stuff. And pretty much unless the planet is burned into a sun, we have an extensive array of life that is buried very, very far under the crust. And even if we nuke the crap out of each other and the surface of the earth is completely scorched, give us 1 billion years. Don't worry, life will be back. It just won't look like us.
When I say we're destroying the world, the context that I'm personally saying it is that we're destroying our ability to exist on this planet by disrupting the natural systems that give us life. And we're also disrupting the life forms in the great chain of being that hold the weave together. And that I tell people, you can destroy the world if you want. It'll do fine when we're gone, but we can't do without it, not in this biological form of embodiment.
Exactly. And so, but that can actually bring people peace. Oh, it's the end of the world. Actually, nothing we can do is the end of the world. We just might not be here to see whatever happens next. And that's just the reality. But here's the thing. If you believe you're part of the life on Earth, then, hey, you'll still be here in some way or another. You'll just be a little bit reformatted. So, and that comes down to that first F word, Paul. And I didn't know if we'd go here on this interview or not, but having studied all kinds of belief systems, having grown up in an atheist family with PhD nuclear engineer grandmother, and certainly not a believer in any one system or religion, I have absolutely decided to embrace reincarnation. And the reason for that,
me too.
It's logical. Okay, I've seen stuff I can't explain, in visions and in fasting in caves. And my next book, that Fast This Way book, actually talk about fasting in a cave led by a shaman and things. But however you want to talk about visions, you can throw all that out the door. It comes down to this: your underlying systems will generally believe something that you tell them to be true, and you'll believe what they tell you is true. So you can program them to a certain extent. And here's the deal. If the most important trigger for you is that first F word, and it is most important by definition, that's why you pull away from a hot stove before you think about how hot it is, because your body says, I will preserve myself. So you overweight fear. Well, if you're playing a video game and you only get to play it once, and after that, you'll never get to play it again, no matter what, you're going to play it fearfully. Right? And if you say, well, I could put another quarter in, and I'm going to play it again, you'll actually do better in the game because you're willing to take appropriate and acceptable risks. And the level of fear of loss goes down a lot. So my math looks like this. Okay, maybe I'm completely crazy and in hypoxic states and on plant medicines or whatever else. I see all kinds of stars in past lives and, in meditations and whatever else. I'm going to write all that off as me being nuts. Okay. Rationally speaking, does it serve me to believe that there's another life after this one? Sure, because it makes me less fearful. So I could be wrong and I'll be dead and I won't know I'm wrong. Or I could be right. I'll have a better life now and maybe a better another life. But you can't lose by adopting that as an operating principle, knowing full well you might be wrong. That's why I think it just makes sense. Not to mention I've seen enough things I can't explain otherwise. I'm fine to believe it without it. But that logic loop will take the most hardcore engineer and say, wait a minute. The normal engineer will say, I should be an atheist and believe that there's no afterlife because I have no provable evidence. Provable evidence being what other people see, not just you. And it turns out there is some pretty good evidence, but regardless of all that, just use the rational truth table stuff I just talked about. You perform better in this life if you believe it. Therefore, who cares if you're wrong? Done.
And, the problem with growth and development through the structure stages of consciousness is as you climb each successive stage, there's less and less people that believe a damn thing you say because you're outside of their paradigm. So this is one of the reasons I tell my students all the time, don't believe a word I'm saying, but be smart enough to test it or you'll never know if it's true. If you just believe it, then you might as well be getting a software download like a computer. You got no choice. But if you actually test it and do what I did to develop the knowledge, then you will find out. And if it doesn't work, then it's my job as a teacher for you to come back to me. And the first thing I'm going to do is say, demonstrate the technique to me. And so far, every single time that happened, the technique was wrong. And when they did it right, it worked. And I say, I don't teach you shit until I've done it about 1,000 times clinically myself, because I take my responsibility as a teacher very seriously. And I don't want the karma of misleading people just to make a few dollars or to sound cool. So I'm careful about what I put out there. And
thank you for bringing up that karma thing. We got to talk about that for a minute.
All right, I got to tell you one thing. Though.
Finish your thing.
When people tell me that they're an atheist, I love to quote Carl Jung. He says, "For something to be rejected, it must first be real."
There you go. Your karma statement made me laugh because I've done this. When I first started my podcast years ago, and it's been nominated for a Webby twice and about 175 million downloads, a couple million downloads a month. Like it's a meaningful show in the top few hundred on iTunes for a long time. And So I got up to maybe 40 episodes, and I realized I have like, and I'm at almost 800 episodes now. So a long time ago, I started saying, well, wait, how many hours of life am I consuming with this? And the more listeners you have, the higher your standards have to be. Because if you make a show that's basically just a bunch of dick jokes, hate, and distraction for people, and you get 200 million hours of people's lives, I could do some math right now, but that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of entire human lifetimes. So if you generate shit content and trick people into watching it, you are the same as a mass murderer. You have wasted hundreds and hundreds of lives. So you have to have a higher and higher standard. Otherwise, if you are a believer in karma, as I am, especially business karma, you better get it right. And if you get it wrong, you better say, you know what? I learned something. Let me share what I just learned, because what I told you last year, turns out we know more now. And if you don't have the integrity to do that, you should hang up the microphone, just flat out. So I love it that you brought up that. I don't want the karma of teaching people stuff that's not real. That's a big thing. And I think it's underestimated in internet marketing, where the common practice is you see it somewhere, you steal it, you put your name on it, and say you invented it, and then sell it as fast as you can without having an understanding of what it is. And I'm a little worried about the state of the internet that way.
Oh, yes. I have a lot of experience. For about 15 years, Penny and I were spending $35,000 to $15,000 a year on lawyers to write cease and desist letters from so many people copying my everything from videos to courses to books to you name it. And it was shocking. And we had them all legally analyzed. On average, there were 95% direct copies of my material. It got to the point where we were spending so fucking much money that Penny said, you know what? You just have to realize that plagiarism is the finest form of flattery. I said, yeah, tell my fucking landlord that.
Hi, everybody. My friends at Bioptimizers have formulated the most complete, potent, and first full-spectrum magnesium formula ever created. It's called Magnesium Breakthrough. If there's one mineral you should be worried about not getting enough, it's magnesium. Magnesium is the body's master mineral, providing over 300 critical reactions, including detoxification, fat metabolism, energy production, and even digestion is influenced by the presence of magnesium. But there are two big problems here. Magnesium has been largely missing from U.S. soils since the 1950s, and probably soils around the world wherever commercial farming is done, which explains why it's estimated that up to 80% of the population may be deficient in magnesium. Most magnesium supplements only contain 1 or 2 forms of magnesium, when in reality there are at least 7 your body needs and benefits from. If you take this later fact into consideration, it's logical to conclude that 99% of the population is likely to be deficient in 2 or more essential forms of magnesium. The good news is that when you do get all 7 forms of magnesium, pretty much every function in your body is upgraded, from your brain to your sleep to reducing pain and inflammation, and it all improves fast. The Bioptimizers formulation team even included trace amounts of something called monoatomic magnesium, which helps make all the other forms of magnesium more bioavailable. With Magnesium Breakthrough as part of your daily supplement routine, you are likely to reduce your stress levels and feel relaxed and at peace, boost your immune system, maintain optimal heart rhythm, sleep faster and deeper. Better sleep quality is a surefire way to reduce your stress and to enhance overall performance. Sleeping better and having all 7 forms of bioavailable magnesium to support your body is a great way to lower cortisol levels, which not only enhances cortisol melatonin balance, but people with adrenal exhaustion, often experiences chronically low energy levels, are likely to experience better short-term memory and improved cognitive performance as a result of enhancing their magnesium profile. And to my knowledge, Magnesium Breakthrough is the most complete magnesium supplement blend available. To get your Magnesium Breakthrough, go to bioptimizers.com/living4D. That's Bioptimizers, bioptimizers.com/living4d. And your checkout code for your 10% discount is all small case PAUL10 for your 10% off any order. Enjoy Magnesium Breakthrough, sleeping better, looking better, and feeling better.
There's something that happens with that. I was really annoyed. So my first book was on fertility, and it was 5 years of writing, and it's gotten a lot of people pregnant. It's called The Better Baby Book. And I did okay with that book, but not a lot of people are pregnant at any one time. So it's one of those kind of consistent things helping people. But when I wrote the Bulletproof Diet, as soon as it spiked and I had a lot of big sales, within a month, there was 14 people who took the registered trademark Bulletproof Diet, wrote names, put my name on the cover of these other knockoff books full of just garbage words. I didn't even know what was in them. And, it basically took it and ran with it. And some of those people made hundreds of thousands of dollars off of my work. And Amazon hides who they are. And
I know exactly what
it's
you're
criminal.
talking about.
It's
the T.
thuggish. And I wouldn't be that bothered, except what they're saying in those books is wrong.
Yes, that's another problem I have to deal with too. Then I get quoted as saying this or that. I'm like, I never fucking said that. What are you talking about? Oh, here's the book right here. I'm like, that book is fucking wrong.
Yeah, and like it's claiming that I have anything to do with it, and so I find that to be a little bit disconcerting, because if you believe in the integrity of your work, it means if someone's going to riff off of it, they at least should have the courtesy to say, oh, hey, I got this idea here, and here's what I think, and here's the modifications I would make. And, I had this great results with whatever this thing is. And you can do that. And I'm finding that it gets a little bit worse when you get into the product space, because if you get a company that does something worthy, immediately you get these, usually it's young guys who are saying, I'm going to get rich quick and I'm going to live on an island and it's going to be great. And they make a crappy version of it, and then they sell it, underprice it. And what that immediately does is it takes away the R&D budget and the growth budget that was necessary to keep evolving. And the people who try the crap product that's basically a knockoff, even has a different name, they don't get the results. And then they say, oh, this whole idea is garbage. It doesn't work. And you're sort of sitting there going, if you guys would just do the work of creating something instead of stealing, then the people who are creators would be able to continue creating at a faster pace, and you would be able to create. So it's actually a big tax. And right now, I think Amazon has to really work on that transparency of, who is doing it. Because I tell you, the next time I see my name and my registered trademarks on a book that is full of bad advice, I'm just going to lose it. But I can't even write those letters. Same as you have a full-time legal person on my team writing cease and desist, blocking stuff. It's like constant swatting of mosquitoes. But if you don't do it, you don't own your words. It's really frustrating.
It is. It's painful. It took me a long time to heal from that. It just, but then it just pushed me deeper into my spiritual practice and made me focus on what I want, not what I don't want, and trust that. My wife says to me all the time, she says, your mind comes up with $1 million ideas like people fart. And if you let people take you over and ruin your day because they stole $20,000 or $30,000 worth of stuff from you, then your creativity is going to go out the back door. So focus on your dream, not your nightmare.
Paul, I think you should keep her. She's right.
Yeah, I've got 2 of them, and they're both geniuses. So I'm fortunate.
Keep them, as the case may be.
Yeah, Penny's very special. But one of the ways of looking at karma, I teach that karma comes in 3 stages: I, we, and all. So I teach that love is expressed in 3 levels. First, you have to love yourself, because you can't love someone else more than you love yourself. So if you're lying to yourself or deceiving yourself or acting in ways to yourself that are self-denigrating, then you're generating karma for yourself. But that boomerang only comes back and hits you. If you're doing that in a relationship, so the we level is 2, you and any other person, now you're impacting somebody else's life in a negative way, so you have to carry the karma for that. And in my system, all is 3 or more people. So any teacher is dealing at the all level of what I call spiritual responsibility. So I tell all my students, when you're coaching people or when you're teaching classes, you really have to be very conscious of what you're teaching and doing your very best to make sure you're not misleading people. Because when you actually do the math on how many people they're impacting with that information And the ripple effect that has, you can actually generate quite a significant wave of karma. And then some students will say to me, well, that doesn't make any sense. How does karma work? How do you even know that that's going to come back? How do you know that someone's doing this stuff doesn't just get away with it? So I give them a simple explanation. One of my definitions of God that I think is quite beautiful. God is a sphere whose circumference is everywhere. God is a sphere whose circumference is nowhere, and a center whose presence is everywhere.
That definitely matches the creation of the universe, flower of life kind of architecture that you see from Nassim Harim and many, many others. And it's a beautiful definition.
So here's the point. You, as an individual point of consciousness, a self, are the center of your own universe, because you know for sure that you're there. You know you're thinking and acting and have the ability to make changes in the world. So that's the center of consciousness that you're responsible for. And because God is all centers and is a sphere whose edges are nowhere because they're everywhere, then anything you put out into the world or the universe can only come back to you, because everything in the universe moves in circular patterns. Well, all we got to do is look at pictures of galaxies and energy, and you look at spin patterns and quantum spin, et cetera, et cetera. But the point I'm making is love is a boomerang. Whatever you put back ultimately has to come back to you, because you are the center of the universe.
There you go. I very much like that holographic picture of the universe. And, I would have questioned karma, especially just being an engineer and all of that. You have to presuppose some things about the world for it to work. And bottom line is, some of those things are very hard to prove, but they're probably true. And so you can go through life saying there's no such thing as karma. Look, these bad people get away with it. But they don't get away with it over the long period of time. They really don't. And maybe you have to presuppose that the idea that we're reincarnated. And if you say, okay, reincarnation's the real deal, then karma can work. And if not, it doesn't. And I've just seen enough, I'm going to call it direct evidence. When I say I've seen evidence, that means it's stuff that I saw, I perceived, and others who are trained in shamanic practice or any of the other ways of accessing those states, they kind of see the same things. And stuff like that, I've just seen dozens and dozens and dozens of times where I've had a vision or something, and I'll go up to someone in my life and I'll say, 2 sentences without enough detail. Just, I want to apologize for this weird thing I saw when I was tripping balls. And I just know that it's real. And you say it, and it's like someone pulled the rug out from them or hit them, and like they stop breathing, they start crying. I've seen people collapse, and that's just how it is. And so I just live in a world where I'm simultaneously rational, things are linear, and they're also crazier than anything. And if you can agree that you live in both those worlds simultaneously, karma works. And it actually is pretty relaxing to think, that guy's going to get what's coming to him. It just might happen when I don't get to see it.
Yeah. A lot of the great spiritual masters teach. Yogananda taught this for sure, because I've studied a lot of his teachings and was raised in his fellowship. But Yogananda says your karma will come back to you. But if it isn't due to the circumstances and the complexity of life and relationships, it may take 1 lifetime, 2 lifetimes, 3 lifetimes, but it will come back for sure. Rudolf Steiner says something very interesting about karma I'd like to share. Steiner says if you're consciously aware that what you're doing is harming another person or is, a negative act towards anybody, then you have to take the karma for it. But he says if you're doing anything and you're genuinely unconscious that it's going to hurt somebody, then the universe will absorb the karma for you.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I wanted to cite, have you ever read Maxwell Maltz's book, Cybernetics?
No, interesting title though.
That's a beautiful book. I think you'd dig it. You could probably just sort of scan read it, but he was a plastic surgeon, but quite an enlightened man. So Maxwell Maltz, Cybernetics. It's a beautiful book. I highly recommend it. But he says, success is getting what you want. happiness is wanting what you get.
There you go. That's a famous quote. I didn't realize that was him.
Yeah. Me and you I think me and you need to go camp out with some ayahuasca and some things to smoke and hang out for a while to talk about all this stuff.
We could go to Burning Man, except they canceled it this year. Dang it.
Yeah. But anyhow, it's just fun. I love these are the things that get me alive. One thing I wanted to share just for the listeners is that there's a lot of things that I teach that I can't prove objectively, but I tell people, because I don't want to generate karma, I say, look, what I'm going to tell you right now is based on my own internal experience. You're probably not going to find this in a textbook or some research study. For example, I can talk about all sorts of things about astral travel and remote viewing, but I can't tell you that this is objective. You have to go experience it yourself. I can just tell you what I know to be possible because I'm a human being just like you. It's just that I spend time investigating things. I don't just let other people tell me what is or isn't true. I have to go find out for myself, or I'm just a program robot that has no authentic sense of self or no agency in the world.
It's a fair point. And there's some science here. One of the things that really helped me to shift and be a little bit more open-minded about this is some training I did years ago with a bizarre group out of Portugal called the IAC, International Association of Conscientiology. And they made up an entire new vocabulary for all these things. It's almost like learning a new language to do any of their training. But I did a seminar. It was every weekend for a month or something. And they teach you all these ways to leave your body and advanced meditation techniques. But the way it came about is the guy who started it, I believe at least 50 or 80 years ago or something, he could just leave his body at will. Whenever he go to sleep, he'd fall out of his body and walk around and do stuff. So he figured out how to teach other people, and then he taught hundreds of people to do this. And he said, guys, I'm not going to tell you what you'll see. I want you to go out there, explore for a while, write down what you see, and let's compare notes. And then based on what at least dozens, if not 100, I don't know how many people did his full thing, but dozens and dozens of people went out and all saw the same things. And the things that they all agreed on, he wrote down into his manual of reality. That is actually science.
Yes, it is. Steiner calls it spiritual science.
Yes. And it's the same thing that actually happened with Stan Grof, the guy who invented holotropic breathing. And Stan I've read with him. He's been on my show. I've done events where I led the event, and he was the main speaker for the Human Potential Institute. And Stan Grof did the same thing. I gave 3,000 patients LSD clinically in Czechoslovakia before it became the Czech Republic. And you know what? They saw common things, and that is science. And if they see common things, there's 5 patterns and they're all tied to stages of birth. Well, there's the birth of transpersonal psychology. And when science says those things can't be observed by 2 people simultaneously, therefore they don't exist, that's bad science, because they're using an untested assumption when they believe that. And that untested assumption is at a fundamental flaw of a lot of the pharmaceutical and even some of the legal system we have now.
Yes, and one of the problems with science is that it's only based on rational, logical, objective observations. But I remind my students that the unrational is the complementary opposite of the rational. And when scientists start saying things that can't be weighed and measured aren't real, I ask them a very simple question. Do you believe in love?
Exactly.
Because you can't weigh it or measure it, but what's your life like without it? Well, you can get rid of every so-called objective research study in the world, and it won't be nearly as bad if you get rid of all the love in the world, and you can't weigh it or measure it scientifically. So just because you can't fit it into your paradigm doesn't mean it's not real, and you're excluding half of reality. And the other thing is, I've studied quite a lot on mathematical theories and Gödel's theorem and many other things, but some of the greatest minds in the world make it very clear that mathematical analysis of the world is only one way of looking at the world. But we have to also consider art, and we have to consider poetry, because poetry expresses things that are not in the words themselves. They're in between the lines, so to speak. And art expresses things that mean something. 100 people can look at the same piece of art and have completely different internal experiences and psychological experiences and perceptions of what the artist is trying to convey or who the artist is or what the artist's personality might be looking at their art. So if we realize that consciousness is not just a mathematical process, but it's a process of love, it's a process of emotion, it's a process of metaphor, it's a process of poetic expression and artistic expression, and that is life is as unrational as it is rational, then we start to actually expand our awareness beyond the confines of a sort of a left brain mathematical logical view of the world. And without that, life gets flat very quick.
It sure does.
Hi, everybody. I'm super excited to announce Symbiotica's new activated charcoal product. You know, I've been using activated charcoal clinically for many years to help people with things like food poisoning or any kind of significant detoxification issue, but I wanted to share Veen, who formulated the product, to tell us really what's going on with this new product so you know exactly how and why you can use it.
Charcoal is a carbon. It's sequestered carbon, negative electrons. We want that in our body. And I wanted to think outside the box. You know, we've been using charcoal for the last 10, 15 years over on the island. We actually make it through our fire and through our coconut shells. We decided to use coconut shells for this product, and it's in a Myron glass bottle, and it's with liposomes. That is something different. We don't see that on the market. So it's something that you can use. You can put it in your bag. You can carry it with you. And if you eat food that causes a little bit of distress, or you have gas or bloating or anything like that, here comes the charcoal, easy access, and boom, you have alleviation right in your stomach.
And then you were mentioning too that it's great for the beautification process, because so many people don't realize that if your body has more toxins than you can eliminate through urine or feces, it'll come out through your skin. And that's what a lot of people's skin problems are. They don't realize, and they keep buying all sorts of topical creams. But this product will help detoxify you from the inside, which will help you beautify your body, correct?
100%. We're in a toxin-burdened world. Our organs are taking on so much. You see people with skin rashes, eczema, acne. What is that? That's toxins that the liver couldn't deal with, that the lymphatic system couldn't deal with. Charcoal comes right in there, does the job. It's an adsorber, so it pulls those toxins in, holds onto them, and you excrete them out.
That's beautiful. If you want to get your activated charcoal product, go to cymBiotika.com, and on checkout, use the code capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 15. And while you're there, look at all their products. They have amazing products. I use them all. I love them. They taste great. They feel great, and they work great. And by the way, a liposomal product means that it's wrapped in fat, so it goes through your body more easily. Your body treats it as a food, not as a drug or anything else, which makes it more bioavailable. So enjoy your new Symbiotica activated charcoal. Symbiotika.com, capital C, capital H, capital E, capital K, 15 on checkout.
Some of the things that I've learned over time, becoming somehow able to go from highly stressed in one job with bad relationships into able to start and run multiple companies and successful on that front with time for my kids and my wife and just successful in multiple domains as an author, as a podcaster, as an entrepreneur at the same time, is just getting a lot of the little stuff out of the way. And you have to embrace the kind of things that we're talking about in this whole interview, because if you want to be able to show up that way in even one domain, if your energy is all basically I'm going to call it gunked up by any of the stuff we're talking about, the stuff you create in the world is a reflection of your own energy. So if you haven't done the work, you end up making stuff that has flaws. And those flaws will echo yours, and the company culture will be off, or you'll make products that aren't as good as you think, or you'll teach the wrong thing. So if you're not committed to a personal growth path and becoming more aware of these odd things that don't make sense, except that that's how things work, I think it's much harder to do things that matter. So you kind of have to put one foot in this water, because if you believe you're a meat robot, your life will suck. And if you believe that you're just a great golden spirit, and you can't actually show up to teach your yoga class on time, and you live entirely in the land of the lotus eaters, and you're about to do your 500th ayahuasca journey, I hate to tell you, it's not working. Like you,
No, you wouldn't need 500
well,
if it was working.
you need to, you basically walk with one foot in both worlds. And if you do that, you're going to be in a position where you can show up and you can create stuff that matters. And if you are too far in either direction, you'll be miserable, or you'll be ineffective, or both.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Houston Smith?
It doesn't sound familiar.
Houston Smith he died maybe a year ago, but he's considered to be the world's foremost expert on world religion. He was actually with Timothy Leary, Ram Dass, and I think it was Richard Alpert. There's one other. There was a trio: Timothy Leary, Ralph Metzner. He was there in the early days of them doing all their research on psychedelics, and he did his first LSD and psilocybin journeys with Ram Dass and Timothy Leary. But Houston Smith, he's one of my heroes. I've read probably everything he's written and studied his course on world religions, and he's actually very unique. And I want to share this with you because I think you'll really appreciate why he's considered to be the most authentic source of knowledge on world religion. He's the only man in the world that's known to have devoted 5 years of his life completely to not only studying and practicing each of the world's major religions, but moving and living in the countries that they were in. And so he actually committed 5 years to completely be a Muslim, to completely be a Buddhist, a Christian, etc., and became considered to be the world's leading expert on world. And he was a professor of religious studies.
I think I read him. I was one class away from having a minor in religious studies in my undergrad. And I'm pretty darn sure that that's where I've seen his name, but that was a long time ago.
I wouldn't doubt it. But the reason I'm bringing his name up is because he said something very interesting in, I think, his book, Cleansing the Doors of Perception. Aldous Huxley has one by a similar title, but Houston Smith has one. Actually, Houston Smith did the first study in the world proving that you could actually have a legitimate spiritual experience on psychedelics. Are you familiar with that one?
Not as a study, no.
I think it's published in the Journal of Philosophy. It was published in 1961. And when I looked into it in about 10 years ago, it was still the most reprinted article in the history of the journal. But there's two things I'll share with you because I think they're kind of fun for our discussion here. And it'll be fun for people to hear if they're not familiar with this. But the first one I'll share with you is after his 12th psychedelic journey, and the next time the guys offered him to do another one, he said, I've seen God enough. I don't need to do anything now but live it. So he basically found that after 12 deep, psilocybin and LSD journeys, that he had seen the truth of life and of himself and of existence, and that to keep looking at what he already knew wasn't necessary. He said, now I need to spend the rest of my life practicing what I've learned from these medicines. And I thought that was a real beautiful experience. Now, here I am, a guy that's done over 400 of these things, but I actually use them to do what I would call spiritual research. So I don't just want to ask the question what God is all the time, although that's my favorite question, and it's a perpetual question for me. But I use them to actually do specific research of various types.
It's a different animal if you're saying I'm going to go to a certain place and do a certain thing. I have a few friends and a few people I just kind of know through business circles where they're saying, I know this is going to do it for me. And they're not doing the work. They're not healing the traumas. They're just getting high and tuning out rather than doing work. And it's the same thing. In shamanic apprenticeship, you're going to spend 10 years taking ayahuasca or something similar almost daily. So you're always a little bit in both worlds. And that's a very different practice than, every weekend, I basically get high AF. But don't worry, I'm doing it because I'm spiritual. And I'm concerned for people who are choosing that path. But the same thing, if you're going to do intense spiritual work, I have a friend who every Saturday she would take half a tab of LSD for 2 years and she'd journal all day long and she was doing her work and she got rid of all of her, emotional trauma, garbage, just stuff like bad patterns that were sitting around in her body because she was using it as a tool for self-awareness. Very different than that other use. So there's right use and just ineffective escapism use, and you got to be careful.
Yes. I tell people that psychedelics are windows and doors, but they won't force you to walk through the door. In other words, they'll let you see through your shadow. They'll let you see into your own trauma, into your own, false beliefs, into everything that you need to see to bring yourself to a state of wholeness. But they're not going to wake you up at 6 a.m. and say it's time to meditate, or it's time to apologize, or it's time to change your beliefs, ... And that's where the real problem, I think, right now with the psychedelic crazes is people actually have the idea from a lot of the research coming out saying that, you can heal PTSD and all that. Yes, it does change neural networks, and it does soften up the ego's filtration system, or somewhat disable the default mode network, which allows a lot of the unconscious processes to rise to consciousness so you can actually see what's there. So it makes the filtration of the ego very porous. But at the same time, if you find 50 things that you could really use to improve yourself and you don't start working on them, and your next journey, you find 10 more, and your next journey, you find 10 more, well, you can actually get to the point where you can end up with very low self-esteem because you found out so much shit about yourself, but you haven't done anything about it. And so you just say, fuck, I need another drug to avoid what I've learned from all this stuff.
The first time I did holotropic breathing, it was a part of a 10-day retreat, and I was doing all kinds of family systems therapy and really digging deep. And I hadn't done the amount of work I've done now, and it was overwhelming. I was kind of depressed, just like you're saying afterwards, going, man, I've got so much work to do. The idea, in fact, I asked one of the instructors, I said, look, so given how trashed all this is, and if there is such a thing as reincarnation, which you crazy people are telling me might be real, wouldn't the right thing to do, given all the garbage I'm dealing with, shouldn't I just kill myself now and start over because it would be less work?
That's funny.
I mean, it's a rational perspective on stuff that isn't rational, and I wasn't suicidal at all. I don't want to give that impression, but I was just like playing out the thought experiment, like just this overwhelming wall of garbage, like literally, like I can't believe that I have this going on, and I didn't know that I had this going on. So you start thinking, oh man, I just need to dig through all this and find what to keep and what not to keep, and it's just so much work, but it's doable. It's just a committed process over time, just like working out, just like losing 100 pounds or anything else like that.
Yeah, that thought in Ken Wilber's Structure Stages of Consciousness would be a postmodern thought. But I want to tell you about Houston Smith's study, because he went to, well, first of all, when he started sharing his psychedelic experiences with other professors and religious higher-ups, they all were, as you can imagine, very scorning of him and say, you cannot have a spiritual experience on a drug. It's impossible. And he got the typical sort of dogmatic viewpoint. So he thought about that and he said, I am going to test this. So what he did was something quite ingenious. He started reading books, religious books, where people were describing their so-called spiritual experiences that they had in churches, temples, sanghas, etc. And he said, those look just like psychedelic experiences, and they're very similar to the experiences I've had on psychedelics, and I've also had religious experiences, and they're very much the same. So then he went and started doing surveys and collected surveys from people, asking them to describe what if they had ever had what they would call a religious experience using a psychedelic drug. And lo and behold, he looked at them and they looked almost identical. So then what he did is he got a whole bunch of these. He went to bishops and preachers and priests, and he said, I'm doing research, and what I need is I'm doing research on spiritual experiences. I'm paraphrasing. I've read the study a long time ago, but the point will be authentic. And so he said, I would love it if you could support me in this research by having as many people in your church, temple, parish, whatever, write down what they experienced while they were having a religious or spiritual experience. And so he got piles of these things sent into him. And of course, the preachers and all these people thought for sure they were going to be right, that you can't have a religious experience on drugs. Then he took a large number of people that described their spiritual experiences on psychedelics. He had them all typed up with the names off of them. And only he knew by coding them who was who. And he took them, mixed them up, and handed them to a series of religious higher-ups and said, now I want you to decide which ones of these people had spiritual experiences in a church or a temple or what you would call a legitimate spiritual experiences, and which ones were on drugs, and they could not distinguish the difference.
I absolutely believe that. It makes a lot of sense. And it's one of those things that the very first time I did ayahuasca was with a shaman in Peru. And I'd gone to this guest house where I was, and I said, hey, I'm looking for a shaman who can do ayahuasca. And they said, you're white. I said, yeah, I know. But I've done my homework, and this is something I want to do, and I don't know how to do it. And the people at the guest house said, well, normally that's just locals, but this was before it became a tourism industry. And so they went and took a couple of days. A guy came in from the jungle, and I did it, and did it with another person. And afterwards, she just said, I can't be Catholic anymore. So she said, I kind of met God and talked to him, and, I need to adjust my belief systems. And she had a religious experience, and you could say that was, Satan talking or something if you're a certain faith. Or you could say that was her direct experience of what she saw and she decided to do. And, that's, there's no way to prove either one of those things, but it definitely was a religious-like experience. And most people sense awe, and oftentimes they'll have, things they'll realize, or downloads, or wisdom, or learnings that are inexplicable. But it happens so much that it used to be, oh, this is just, Larry and Sergey and Steve Jobs, and a lot of the most creative innovators of our time had a time when they did this stuff. And not all of them, but a vast majority of them, and some of our greatest musicians and artists and filmmakers. And I was at a dinner. I wrote about this in one of my books. I was at a dinner in New York with it's kind of a who's who, movers and shakers, and everyone there had done something noteworthy. And it was a Jeffersonian style dialogue, where what you do is only one person can talk at the time. So everyone's quiet, and you say, okay, I'd like to ask this kind of question. And then people kind of raise their hand and you talk. So it's actually a really calm and not so loud dinner party. And the question I asked was, I said, look, how many people in the room have used psychedelics as a path of personal development? And every hand in the room went up. There were people who were 70, there were people who were 21. And I think that there's an overrepresentation of that. I'm not saying they're all heavy users, and I'm not saying that they're not without risk. In fact, I think there's more risk for psychedelics than people recognize, especially if they're done without consciousness, without set and setting and spiritual protections and all that. But they are making a difference. And I think if you were to get real data, which is suppressed because of legal issues, you would find that the people who are further along in their evolution have oftentimes, we'll say have always, and this came about from a research of almost 500 people I interviewed about things, more often than not, they've done something to get outside of themselves to become more aware of what they're doing. And quite often it involves a plant medicine, but it doesn't always. And there are other techniques if you don't want to. Holotropic breathing, well, it's stronger than a lot of the drugs you can take. So there are ways.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of things. And I have had to rehabilitate many people that have blown their minds out with psychedelics and made multiple trips to the jungle and came back completely and utterly scattered. And so
I'm happy you said that too. It is not without risk. Even meditation. Some people go nuts from meditation, and it's well documented. Like, you got to kind of watch out for that.
Sure. Have you ever read Richard Gerber, MD's book, Vibrational Medicine?
Yep.
Well, he documents all sorts of problems with meditation, very, very complex mapping of the homunculus, and shows exactly how he surveyed all sorts of people and the pains they were having in their meditation practices. And he showed that actually what happens is, as they're accumulating life force and they're doing inner healing, that the energy flowing through the body is actually following the homunculus. And he showed by analyzing a significant number of meditators and mapping their problems, and as they got deeper into meditation, that their problems went right along the structure of the homunculus, and showed that it's a natural healing effect that takes place, but we mistake it for a pathology or an illness, but it's really a transitional state.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. One of the things that we were talking about reincarnation, I wrote myself a note. I wanted to share something with you in that there's a little exercise that my soul gave me to help people have a different perspective, both on what they are and whether or not reincarnation is possible. So the way I do this is I tell everybody in class, hold your hand up. And then I point to somebody and tell me what you're looking at. And of course, they say, my hand. I say that again. My hand. Say it 3 more times and pay attention to what you're saying. My hand. I say, you're using a possessive. If I pointed to your body and said, what was that? You'd say, my body. So the question I have is, who's in possession of the hand and the body? And then that leaves them in a deep state of pondering. I say, okay, now let's look at the basic alchemy of life. We know that everything that's here is created out of earth, water, fire, air, and space. Or if you want to use space as synonymous with ether, we can do that. But I also explained to them that the alchemists didn't use earth, water, fire, and air as objectively meaning a cup of dirt, a cup of water, a fire in the fireplace, or air. They were using those as vibrational ranges. So anything solid is considered earth. Ice, when it's frozen, would be in the alchemical earth's vibrational range. But if you melt it and it turns into water, it would be in the water vibrational frequency. If it is heated up to the point that it becomes atmosphere, it's in the air frequency. And if you have enough heat to light it on fire, you can bring it right up to the plasma state. So I'm telling them that these elements are really vibrational frequencies. So just like you have the chakra system or a rainbow, all of which is just different frequencies of light. So the alchemists were referring to these elements as ranges of frequencies which create different effects in the material realm. But I say, let's just think of this from the perspective of earth and water and fire or warmth from the sun and then air. So I'll do this with you. So if I said to you, Dave, what percentage of your body is the earth element, something solid? What would you say?
Geez,
It doesn't matter if the math's
well,
right.
I'm sort of thinking if you consider what's not an electron and all of that, it's essentially mostly not there.
You're being too scientific.
All right. So
because you can't, electrons are involved in all of this.
You're mostly water, and it's somewhere around 70%, depending on what's
right. So if you say you're 70% water, when you're born, you're about 70%. The average person, when they die of old age, is about 55%. They say you're born as a plum and you die as a prune. And so and the math doesn't matter because the point that I'm going to make always makes itself, because you're basically saying, what are you composed of? Well, let's say my bones and my flesh, if they were dehydrated, we'll call that 15% of me. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Water, we know it's about 70%. Fire. So I say, how much of your body is actually warmth or metabolism? Most people say 1 or 2%. And I say, well, how much of you is air? Most people say 1 or 2%. Oh, say, okay, good. But you're using a possessive for something that's made of earth, water, and fire, air. So whatever is in the body is not actually the earth, water, fire, and air because it's in possession of it. So if I take away the earth, water, fire, and air, I ask this question, where are you? Well, most people are smart enough. They think about it for a while and they go, well, I guess I'd be everywhere. And I say, if you're everywhere, at once you're also nowhere, aren't you? Good. So what you are is not dependent upon a body. And you just proved it because you use a possessive for anything bodily or anything physical. My car, my house, my girlfriend. Therefore, you have to ask yourself, who is the subject that has a relationship or a possessive relationship with the object? And what reincarnates is the subject, but it can manifest the object. And then I remind them that Einstein himself said the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. And so what is the field that is making the statement, my body or my hand? It's called your mind. And what is your mind? It's a vortex in the field of one mind or one consciousness, which is all that is. And that's what is expressing itself and organizing planets and stars and molecules and cells into what we would call systems, objects, or machines, or whatever, however you want to slice it. But a watch can't build itself. A car can't build itself, and a body can't build itself. So I take them through this stage and say, okay, now, so here's your meditation. If you were, before you came into this body, everywhere and nowhere simultaneously as consciousness, which could also be a light body, then what makes you think that you're not going to come back and do this again? And how do you know you haven't done it thousands of times already?
You don't really know, and some of the stuff that I teach in the Human Performance Institute, and especially at 40 Years of Zen, where I get out of the, like, here's how to manage just your biology. It's easier to do all the personal development, esoteric stuff when your cells make enough energy for you to have the willpower to do the work. But if you do the work, your cells also get more energy. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. But I look at the body just as an eddy, right? Because some of the anti-aging work that I've done, it takes about 2 years, 790 something days, if I remember the exact number, to replace half your cell membrane. It's half the fat in your body. If you eat good fat, 2 years later, 50% of it will be replaced with fat that isn't toxic or isn't damaged and whatnot. And if you wait another 2 years, you're at 75%. Another 2 years, you're at 80 whatever percent. And this is why the vegan diet causes decline over time. Just if you're eating all these vegetable oils that are less compatible with your body, and some tissues change much more quickly than others, particularly the white fat in your body. So if that fat's changing every day, well, okay, that's not actually you. It looks like you. And then collagen, the turnover's half-life is every 7 years. So if you start eating more collagen and more amino acids in your diet, more bone broth, all that kind of stuff, well, 7 years from now, you'll have replaced half your collagen, hopefully better formed than the stuff before when you were nutrient deficient. And it goes on, and water is replaced more quickly, and blood refreshes itself roughly every 4 months. Right?
You turn over, you're making 2 million red blood cells a second on average. So you're turning over red blood cells very, very rapidly.
And because of all that, really, there is no body. It just cannot exist, because at what point was it your body? What it is, it's an eddy in time. It's just a slow moving eddy that accumulates certain things and holds on to them for a while. And then they end up like the eddy in the stream. Or they bounced that leaf out and it went down the stream, and another leaf came in, and you get too many leaves and suddenly you don't have an eddy anymore, right? There was too much water. There wasn't enough water. Something happened. But what do you know? Water comes back. There might be an eddy again. And if you look at information field theory and all that, that's probably what's going on with us. And that does provide a real basis for, where's your energy live? And the question of where's consciousness, you look at that, you say, okay, is it in the brain? It cannot be wholly resident in the brain for all sorts of reasons that you've talked about on other shows and on this show. But it may partially be there, or it may not be there at all. But some of it is non-local. And that's why I kind of laugh. I have some really good friends who are like, I'm going to freeze my brain. I know I'm going to be brought back to life. And even if you don't believe all the afterlife stuff, my whole awareness of the human body is it's a distributed intelligent system that goes far beyond the brain, and it rolls up into the brain. So you're saying, I'm just going to take this one organ and somehow it's going to be able to be reanimated. If it's true that you are, that there are parts of your consciousness that are not in your meat, and some of your meat is frozen in a lab somewhere, and some of you is getting redeployed somewhere else on the grid, I have no idea what that's going to do, but that always just seems a little bit messy to me. And I mean, that would piss off Aubrey de Grey, who's a good friend, and others who, flat out say, how dare you? But that's my take on it. Like, I'd rather not go down that path, because I just don't think I'm a mute robot.
Well, me either. And Thich Nhat Hanh says something that addresses this quite beautifully. He says, when you're looking at a flower, you're looking at something that is made of non-flower elements. There's nothing in a flower that is the flower itself. Everything in the flower is, like we've just said, earth, water, fire, air, molecules. But it's only the combination of all those things that creates the pattern that we have given the name flower. But the point he's making is that what you see before you as a flower is not made of anything flower. It's a combination of other things. And the interesting thing too is if you say, okay, well, where did all that stuff come from? Well, let's say you could break it down to the periodic table of elements, and scientists have investigated this. I've looked into this. And what they find is, okay, these elements came from the sun. These ones came from this part of the galaxy, maybe Mars or whatever. But then they say, well, wait a minute. We have to realize that whatever's in the sun, because we know that we have black holes that produce white holes and give birth to new stars, that everything that was in the sun was once in another sun, which was once in another sun, and that goes on infinitely. So the paradox is everything in our body came from everywhere in the universe, and that's a scientific fact. So you have to say even the location of your body from a materials perspective is a standing wave, if you will.
It appears to be that is how reality works. And you look at Lynn McTaggart's work on information fields and information field theory, that's probably the most descriptive way the world works. It's just so hard to perceive using human eyes and human vision, at least without a lot of technology or chemistry or esoteric breathing techniques or something. It's hard to see all that stuff. So it sounds pretty incredulous. I find that general state of things to be an accurate representation. It's just hard to work with and hard to see. And it doesn't mean that you have to change what you see, what you do, what you believe. It doesn't mean that things aren't linear. They can be both linear and all this stuff can be true simultaneously. And that's where a lot of people sort of go nuts trying to think about it because, well, that's that whole thing they call non-dualism.
Well, we also see that in everything of our life. Look at all the different interpretations of any scripture or any legal document. The point I'm making is if you write something or say something, to you it's very objective. But to somebody else, like a lawyer, will find 15 ways to make that look like it's said or meant something different because that's their job, is to manipulate the context of meaning. But my point is that within any linear system, there's always a nonlinear perceptual process available to us. And that's why we have all these differences in interpretations of meanings of everything. For example, one of the ones I give my students is when Moses was standing before the burning bush, which he perceived to be God, he said, "Who are you?" And the burning bush said, "I am that I am." Well, that can be interpreted multiple ways. So I tell people, consider that what the burning bush was saying is, I am that I am. And if you keep going, I am that, I am that, I am everything that is. So I am that I am could mean I'm a burning bush. I am that I am could mean I am being. I am that I am. The fact that I'm here and you cannot explain this burning bush means I'm a mystery to you. I am that and I am that means everything. Everything that you think of as something separate is actually part of what I am. So with one little statement, I am that I am, you can actually interpret that by using what we might look at as a parallel process, as opposed to just reading the words dogmatically or literally. And Houston Smith, for example, says there's 4 levels of scriptural interpretation. The lowest is literal. The second level, or the second most potent, is ethnocentric, which means it's interpreted based on the belief of your group. The third most potent is allegorical, which means it's a story. And the story is going to mean something to each of you that's unique to your own perception of the story and your life experiences. And the final level, and the most, what he would consider to be the most profound or most authentic, there's a fancy name for it, which I can't remember, but it means inspirational. So the most enlightened person will read any scripture and find the inspiration that's being offered. But the least enlightened person reads the words and takes them literally.
That's a fair point. And the best words I've found are both literally true and allegorical. And I've been reading some of Dan Brown's, the Harvard professor, master of hypnotherapy, who was just on my show, and he has learned to read Sanskrit and studied with the Dalai Lama and things like that, in addition to all of his work in the West. And so he's translated 13th century cave yogi meditation manuals that are very direct. Like, you must put your eyes exactly here, and you put your attention exactly here, and you breathe exactly this way. And so they're giving you step-by-step instructions. And at the same time, there's all the allegorical. So it's hard to read, and you hope the translation's right. And it probably is, given who translated it. But I believe that there's 1,000 years plus, in some cases up to 5,000 years, of people trying to take, well, we know this stuff, we've seen this stuff, and they want to hand it down to the next generation. But then, occasionally, there's the burning of the library at Alexandria. There's most of the world's spiritual knowledge vacuumed up by the Vatican and locked away from human knowledge, where they just won't show it to us because it might disagree with whatever they taught. Shame on you guys. You need to stop that.
Or they'll lose their control because people will become aware of what's really going on.
Heaven forbid. And, all those things. But we've also had, the burning of a lot of the scrolls throughout China. Some of these very, very ancient things. There was a cleansing that happened. And this is ancient knowledge that's actually priceless. And, if I was a mean, brutal dictator, I'd say vacuum it all up and lock it in my library. Don't burn it. It might be useful someday. We kind of might need this. Losing the knowledge of humanity throughout history is a great loss. And right now we have the internet, which is very interesting because you can find more of that than ever before. When you and I started our path, you go to the library and look up in a card catalog and find the microfiche and put this little thing on a magnifying glass projector and slide it around until you found the article you needed. It was horrifying.
And it used to take a long time to find stuff.
I mean, any of the books I've written would have taken a lifetime if I had to use microfiche in a library. I mean, it is so much better because all this research is just there and I can find exactly the piece. Oh yeah. And then you put the things together and it's such a beautiful kind of spiritual amalgamation thing to be able to sit down and write for 8 uninterrupted hours and just realize no one's ever put these things together this way. This works. You can't do it with old tech. So we have all this. And at the same time, there's an increasing injection of garbage because the search engine that worked 10 years ago, I'm talking about you, Google, today it doesn't work anymore. It tries to tell me whatever they want me to buy or see. And I literally have to go to something like DuckDuckGo to get any useful medical information. And it is horrifying. It's disturbing. And it's worse than the burning of ancient libraries because now we have the knowledge, it's here, and someone decided you shouldn't be able to see it. So I'm all about, non-biased search algorithms right now as a tool of consciousness, as a very important part of things because 90% of traffic to, say, even a blog like yours, it comes from search. And if suddenly they say the blog like yours cannot exist because we don't believe in what you say, therefore it's not real, therefore it can't be found, that's brutal. And if we build that into our system, the same system might be around, until we have our next big atomic war or something. So we need to fix our algorithms pretty quickly because sad things are happening right now.
Well, the movie Plandemic just launched yesterday. Are you aware of that?
I didn't realize it had launched. I've seen some stuff around about it for a long time. And
well, I started watching it. It is an absolutely essential documentary to watch. It's extremely well done, extremely well researched. And it is, I'll use my honest feelings, it is fucking unbelievable to see how much of our freedom of speech, our constitutional rights, and how much lying, manipulation, cheating. I mean, it is unfrickin' believable. It's got Dr. Epstein in there in Congress testifying how Google's manipulating things. It's loaded with stuff everybody needs to know, and it totally lets the cat out of the frickin' bag on this whole COVID thing.
I don't know, Paul. I heard that only bad people watch documentaries they're not supposed to watch.
Yeah, well,
I mean, you pause for a second.
Leslie Manookian was on my show, and we were talking because she's researched the whole thing a lot, and she was saying, they keep taking the truth away, and I said, well, I'm just curious, how do you know what the truth is? She goes, that's easy. If they take it away, it's probably true. So anybody that's telling the truth that goes against their agenda disappears. And therefore, it's true. But I'm bringing that up just to say to everybody, if you haven't seen it, it's on London Real TV, which they now have a protected server so that Google cannot erase it and take it away. And it is definitely one of the best documentaries and one of the most important documentaries of our time. And everybody should watch it.
You want to know something kind of funny? Brian Rose is a good friend who runs London Real. And for the first 3 years of the show, every guest got Bulletproof coffee because Brian started on the very first days, like the first probably few months that Bulletproof was around making products. He got into it. And so he handed it to everyone. And it was really, really cool to see that. And he's evolved his business. He's evolved, as a human being so much. I've been to weddings with him in Scotland and just I watched what he's done.
I was just on his podcast.
Were you
2 weeks ago?
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. So
and he asked me what I thought was going on with the pandemic, and I laid it on the table. So if you want to really hear my thoughts, have a listen.
I'll listen to that. And it's kind of funny here. You go back. History is told by the victors, and you can go back as far as you want. Back in the 60s, yes, the U.S. did bad things, and I've asked. Okay, here you go. I had Dan Brown from Harvard, who is one of the most acknowledged academic experts in hypnotherapy on earth. And he's on Bulletproof.
Yes, I know who he is.
Okay, he's on Bulletproof Radio just in the last couple months. And I'm interviewing him, and he says, oh, yeah, I spent 150 hours with Sirhan Sirhan, the guy who killed Robert Kennedy. And
I remember that. I listened to your
Okay, you listen to that. And I'm sitting there going, did he just say that on my little podcast? I mean, my podcast isn't that little, but it's not like 60 minutes. And for the benefit of your listeners who didn't get to listen to it, he said, yeah. I said, there should be a documentary on this. You're telling me this guy was a sleeper agent, and as a professor and a Harvard guy and as a hypnotherapist, you are 100% certain that this guy you spent 150 hours with was pre-programmed? And he said, oh, yeah, you tap on the elbow twice, which is an induction technique. And he starts crouching and talking about murdering things. It's obvious. And so they should do a documentary. He said, yeah, they did a documentary. Then they deleted my segment of the documentary, and they audited my taxes every year for years. And they put me on do not fly lists, and they messed with me for years. And I'm like, did he just say that on my show? This can't even be. So we have a long history of stuff happening that you're not supposed to know about. And a lot of people get really angry and they feel unsafe about it. But
well, they should.
I disagree with you.
Well, what I'm saying is when you realize you're being manipulated and lied to by the people you pay to be in office and create safe medical systems and safe media systems. I mean, if you or I make claims like the medical system does, we'd both be put out of business in 5 minutes. But when you watch what the medical system gets away with and a lot of these big corporations and what Google's doing and what's Facebook's doing, well, then you should get fucking angry and you should get.
No, you're going all against your teachings here, Paul.
No. Anger is very, very important. Anger inspires people to make change. If your anger is a negative form of anger that's self-destructive or damaging in relationships, that's one thing. But if the anger inspires you to stand up to protect others or to bring the truth out where we're being lied and manipulated to, then anger is a very important emotion. And we wouldn't have it if it wasn't for a positive reason.
So hate also has a positive reason?
Well, I don't think hate is a healthy expression, and anger and hate aren't synonymous.
No, they're not at all.
Other.
But you're saying if we have it, there must be a healthy use of it. I would just say, look, the electrons that you put into the anger, you can also put into doing the work and making the change. And every bit of it you waste in anger doesn't work. And there's the old story of a samurai, and this is probably 16th century Japan. And someone killed his master, so he hunts the other samurai, the bad guy, hunts him across Japan, finally tracks him down, beats him in combat, and is standing above him and is about to put his sword to end the guy's life. And the guy spits in his face. And the samurai,
yes, and he won't kill him because he made him angry.
Yeah, exactly. He said, I can't kill you in anger. I'm going to kill you when I'm at peace, right? So I would just say, look, there has never been a time in all of human history when the Muggles were told the truth. Ever. You go back.
Probably true. Yeah.
Go back to the ancient Mayan situation. You're the guy who's getting your head lopped off at the top of the temple. Yeah, they probably didn't tell you the truth. You're back in ancient Elizabethan times. Did they tell you what was really going on in the back room when there was dealings between dukes and whatevers and they're putting you out on the field? No. They never have done that. Did any power structure at all do that? No. And here's why.
People can't handle the truth.
That's not even why. It's because there are core algorithms that have to exist in every power structure. And if you are a government, the number one rule in government is stay in power. And it's the same thing as in humans. Run away from, kill, or hide from scary things. And so governments, they will sacrifice their people. They will lie to their people because they have to stay in power, right? So you say the stuff that keeps your people from rioting. That's what you do. Otherwise, you are an ineffective government. You get overthrown. Right. And that's why you see tanks running over people. That's why you see subterfuge. That's why you see the US acting aghast that, oh my God, Russia probably hacked something here. Like, have we not had the NSA hacking the entire world for the last 50 something years? Yes. Right. It's what countries do. And how dare you have nuclear weapons? Don't look at ours. It's what countries do. Right. And it's a dance, and it's what powerful people do. And I mean, you've probably read it. Robert Greene is one of the wisest guys alive. The 48 Laws of Power.
I've got it in my library.
Me too. His book changed my career when I was young. And his most recent book, his opus, that only came out in the last few years, The Laws of Human Nature. It marches into it some more. So I'm not angry about this. It's a fact of human life. There's all sorts of stuff going on you're not going to know about, and that people don't want to tell you. And you can be angry. You're not going to change that, because that's actually a condition of the way human society works today. What you can do, you can change your vibration. You can change your believability, your gullibility, and you can look at something in the news and say, I wonder who really wants me to believe that, because it may or may not be true. And yeah, maybe the World Trade Centers, it happened exactly the way the government said, and I'll ignore all the other evidence. Or maybe I'll just say, you know what? Something weird happened there. And I'm not going to say I believe the conspiracy theorists, because they don't know. That's why they're called theorists, and they don't have a lot of proof. And they can say, well, this guy knows that guy because they were on this board together, and therefore this happened. And you can spend your whole life painting little strings of yarn on a cork board saying this is connected to this, but you don't really know. You could just simply say that, you know what? Bad people do bad things in the world, yet the world is an amazing place, and I'm going to go do something amazing and make the world better. Right.
Yeah, and I think if what we're referring to as anger inspires you to do that, then it's a positive thing. But if it inspires you to be just as destructive as what you're looking at, then it's a negative emotion, and then it falls more toward the category of hate. But I think ultimately, really, what is all this stuff? It's just the flow of energy that we use psychological interpretations of. So to say that anger is bad is like saying sunlight's bad or any electricity's bad.
I don't think anger is bad. I just think that if you can put your energy into doing something instead of being angry, it'll work. So feel the anger, turn it off,
that's my point.
Do the work. And it's the people who stay angry and they read things to feed their anger and they use the anger as a fuel source. Anger as a fuel source will destroy you. Anger as a spark to start something good is fine.
That's my point.
Okay.
That's
and then we're in agreement on that. The other thing, the Byron Katie work you talked about before, is that true, and is it provably true? It's probably not for most things, at least that the overall arching theme of pandemic. I haven't seen it, right? So all I'm saying there is there's a narrative in that movie, and there's some provable facts. This person on this video said these things, and they did these things, and this is clearly stupid. And yes, Fauci was ordered not to do stuff in Wuhan that he did anyway, and that was in Newsweek. Okay, so there's some stuff that's fishy, right? And
I want you to watch it and then talk to me.
I will watch it. The point there, though, is that anytime you have someone saying, I know everything that happened, they're probably wrong, at least in some portion of it. They can be directionally right. But I find a lot of times there's so much stuff added on to the so-called conspiracy theory side of things that I think the powers that be sort of like it because it makes it less credible. So you don't have to be fantastic about things. Just be like, you know what? People are doing bad stuff over there. It looks like there's probably a plan, and whatever they're doing isn't working. I'm not going to be a part of it, or I'm going to work against it, or whatever your thing is. That's cool, but it's not gospel, because you can never know someone else's motivation. You can only know their behaviors.
Yes. Well, two things that I have to interject. One, a conspiracy is a conspiracy because nobody knows for sure it's true. But the pandemic provides a lot of objective evidence. And the second thing is it's not even close to one person. It's a number of experts with unique knowledge, experience, and facts from their own field of interest. And when you look at the combined evidence, then the picture starts to take place. And I think we've been so busy getting programmed by a media message that's been crafted to make us believe we should wear masks and all these people are dying, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one side, but very few people have actually looked at the other side. And I teach holistic thinking, and which is you have to look at both sides of an argument. You got to sit on both sides of the table and be just as honest about looking at that viewpoint as you are about your own viewpoint, or you're always going to be polarized and partially blind. So whenever I look at these issues, I do a lot of work to say, okay, what does both sides say, such as vaccinations or circumcision, or whether you should use creatine or any of these things. And that's how I built my whole mental structure that built an institute that got me on this podcast with you. And so I say that because the people that are in the pandemic movie are highly credible people, as credible as anybody on the other side, we all owe it to ourselves to flip the coin and then sit quietly and say, how do I interpret the data now?
Getting more data is always good. Ascribing motive is usually false. And that's where I haven't even seen the movie. I just find that having lived through September 11th, having been a student of history, and having been blessed to in some cases interact with extremely highly placed people in various things, there's so many layers, there's so many things going on. There is some bad business afoot in the world right now from many different directions, and it's abundantly apparent. I just don't have a big enough ego to say that I know exactly who is doing what, but I can say the direction is terrible and the strategies that are chosen do not make people well, and they make a few people really rich, but it also makes their children ill, which is sort of dumb.
We had a much more fun discussion than we might have if we'd have stuck to this outline, so I'm really digging it.
You know what? I never read the outline, Paul, because
good.
The outlines always screw up a good conversation. I don't send them out for my show.
They can. My challenge is that I like to get into so many segues. I often never get to the point that the person was being interviewed for. So I try to kind of mix it with a little bit of left and right brain technology. But
basically, we're going to let the good things happen. And if you're a good interviewer, you ask good questions. We had a great conversation, and I think people enjoy it. And it's one of those things where I used to always do the prep notes for people, but after hundreds and hundreds of episodes, I realized, you know what? Serendipity is something that you can command, and let's let serendipity drive us to talk about the good things. And you always do the prep work. I always do the prep work, but I don't send the notes. And then they're backup.
I like serendipity, but I even more enjoy synchronicity.
There you go. Even better.
But, all this stuff we're talking about, if you study the Hindu scriptures, what do they say about existence or creation as we see it? There's a nice name they give it.
It depends which scripture you're talking about, unless I'm not sure you're...
Maya.
Maya. Okay, got it.
Which means the illusion, right?
Yep.
So that's what spiritual practices are for. They're ultimately there to teach you to strip away the illusions till you figure out who and what you really are. And when you realize it, it's it can leave you laughing and crying so hard it might take you a week to recover. Why? Because this mysterious God that you thought was in some other domain, or that you could never access, or that you had to go to church for, is the flowers, the trees, the birds, the bees, the stars, the space, and things that you can't even wrap your head around. But the point is that what you thought was something you had to go find and get to was right there in front of you all the time, and you're breathing it and looking at it. And I'll give you a great quote from St. Francis of Assisi. People used to go to him all the time and say, how do I find God? Do you know what he would say to them?
What would he say?
What you are looking for is what's looking.
Gotta love it.
So that's probably a great place to wrap up. Let's do this again and write down all the things that you want to explore together, and we can get into it, because I've spent my whole life researching this stuff. And one of the things actually that came to me that I never got a chance to bring up because you and I were so engaged, we were talking about the earth, water, fire, air, and who are you and where are you? There's a very neat philosophical argument in one of my philosophy books. And basically what they're doing is trying to distinguish whether anything is factual. And so the sort of thought experiment is this. They say, okay, you have a ship. We're talking, maybe a ship made of wood, right? Like older ship, not a modern steel or something like that. But you could use the same argument. But anyhow, they say you have a ship. We'll call it the Jupiter. The Jupiter leaves port on a very long voyage. Let's call it around the world. They get to the first port after rough seas. The mast is broken. They replace the mast. Then they go aground. The hull's broken. They have to replace large sections of the hull. So the argument keeps going. Well, what happens is by the time the ship gets back to port, it's still got the same name, and everybody in the ship relates to it and refers to it as the exact same ship that left port. So the philosophical question is it the same ship?
Yeah, there you go.
And doesn't that just leave us with a very interesting question about everything?
Yeah, I love that, Paul. Let's have another conversation in a couple of months. We'll keep the conversation going. I enjoy your work, enjoy your impact on the world. I think you've done some awesome stuff. And I am so intrigued that you and I were on that parallel butter coffee path way back in the day.
Well, they say great minds think alike. And, I think, I've got a great book in my library called The Parallel Sayings of Jesus, Lao Tzu, Buddha, and Krishna. And what I love about it is it actually, beyond a shadow of a doubt, says they use different words, but they're all saying the same things. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the closer you get to the truth, so you and I are dealing with fundamental issues, people's health, how to live better. So the deeper you get into them, it's kind of like if you start at the roof of a building and you go one layer at a time, you're going to run into roof tiles, tar paper, wood, electronics, chandeliers, bathrooms, tiles. But when you get down to the bottom, every house is going to have a foundation under it.
There you go.
As we get people like you and I that explore deeply enough, always are getting closer to the foundation. So you get led to, okay, what regulates blood sugar? How do you do it? ... So inevitably, people that are open and are honest researchers and explorers are going to find very similar things. And the neat thing is about it is, and this has happened, as you know, all over the world, people coming up with inventions at the same time and then getting into battles over who really invented it. Well, the reality is they both invented it.
There you go. In fact, Mark Lemley, a Stanford law professor of intellectual property and a guy I did yoga with for a long time, has written a really convincing paper, a legal paper published in legal journals about the myth of the lone inventor and how most great inventions happen in multiple places, usually about 3 times within mere months of each other. And he's like, this is how consciousness seems to work. So it's kind of funny, but I love hearing how you thought about it reductively and said, how do we chelate these things? And I'm looking at it from, the Tibetans did it right. And MCT oil is different than butter. And there we go. All right, Paul. Thank you, brother.
How do people find you? Bulletproof. How do people find your books and you?
You can find me at daveasprey.com. It's my blog, and Bulletproof Radio, wherever you like to consume podcasts, is a great way to do it. And if you go to one of those 2 places, you'll find everything you need. I'm active on Instagram, dave.asprey, and on Facebook and things like that. So whatever your favorite social media platform is, I'm probably there. And Bulletproof Radio, 2 episodes a week, worth listening to.
Thank you, Dave. It's been a fantastic, so far we're batting 100% for exciting, interesting conversations and lots of love. And I can't wait to do it again.
Me too. Thank you.
Be well.
Be well.
Thank you for listening to Living 4D with Paul Chek and today's guest, Dave Asprey. You can find Dave online at www.daveasprey.com or follow him on Instagram at Dave Asprey. If you want to hear more from Dave and also see amazing speakers like Susie Batiste, Maria Shriver, and Jay Shetty, check out the Biohacking Virtual Conference happening October the 10th. Go to biohackingconference.com to purchase tickets. Follow Paul on Instagram and Twitter at Living4D Podcast or on his YouTube podcast channel, youtube.com/Living4D with Paul Chek. Remember, you can watch more on Paul's blog at paulcheksblog.com and the Chek Institute's new media site, chekiva.com.